Chapter 23 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Goethe. In the bosom of the woods, which stretched for many miles from the immediate environs of Sicca, and placed on a gravel slope reaching down to a brook, which ran in a bottom close by, was a small rude hut, of a kind peculiar to Africa, and commonly ascribed to the wandering tribes, who neither cared nor had leisure for a more stable habitation. Some might have called it a tent, from the goat's hair cloth with which it was covered, but it looked, as to shape, like nothing else than an inverted boat, or the roof of a house set upon the ground. Inside it was seen to be constructed of the branches of trees, twisted together or wattled, the interstices, or rather the whole surface, being covered with clay. Being thus stoutly built, lined, and covered, it was proof against the tremendous rains to which the climate for which it was made was subject. Along the centre ridge or backbone, which varied in height from 6 to 10 feet from the ground, it was supported by 3 posts or pillars. At one end it rose conically to an open aperture, which served for chimney, for skylight, and for ventilator. Hooks were suspended from the roof for baskets, articles of clothing, weapons, and implements of various kinds, and a second cone, excavated in the ground, with the vertex downward, served as a storehouse for grain. The door was so low that an ordinary person must bend double to pass through it. However, it was in the winter months only, when the rains were profuse, that the owner of this respectable mansion condescended to creep into it. In summer she had a drawing room, as it may be called, of nature's own creation, in which she lived, and in one quarter of which she had her lair. Close above the hut was a high plot of level turf, surrounded by old oaks, and fringed beneath with thick underwood. In the centre of this green rose a yew tree of primeval character. Indeed, the whole forest spoke of the very beginnings of the world, as if it had been the immediate creation of that voice which bade the earth clothe itself with green life. But the place no longer spoke exclusively of its Maker. Upon the trees hung the emblems and objects of idolatry, and the turf was traced with magical characters. Littered about were human bones, horns of wild animals, wax figures, spermaceti taken from vaults, large nails, to which portions of flesh adhered, as if they had had to do with malefactors, metal plates engraved with strange characters, bottled blood, hair of young persons, and old rags. The reader must not suppose any incantation is about to follow, or that the place we are describing will have a prominent place in what remains of our tale. But even if it be the scene of only one conversation and one event, there is no harm in describing it as it appeared on that occasion. The old crone, who was seated in this bower of delight, had an expression of countenance in keeping, not with the place, but with the furniture with which it was adorned. That furniture told her trade. Whether the root of superstition might be traced deeper still, and the woman and her traps were really and directly connected with the powers beneath the earth, it is impossible to determine. It is certain she had the will. It is certain that that will was from their inspiration. Nay, it is certain that she thought she really possessed the communications which she desired. It is certain, too, she so far deceived herself as to fancy that what she learned by mere natural means came to her from a diabolical source. She kept up an active correspondence with Sicca. She was consulted by numbers. She was up with the public news, the social gossip, and the private and secret transactions of the hour, and had before now even interfered in matters of state, and had been courted by rival political parties. But in the high cares and occupations of this interesting person we are not here concerned, but with a conversation which took place between her and Juba, about the same hour of the evening as that of Cæcilius's escape, but on the day after it, while the sun was gleaming almost horizontally through the tall trunks of the trees of the forest. "Well, my precious boy," said the old woman, "the choicest gifts of great Cham be your portion. You had excellent sport yesterday, I'll warrant. The rats squeaked, hey? And you beat the life out of them. That scoundrel sacristan, I suppose, has taken up his quarters below." "You may say it," answered Juba. "The reptile! He turned right about, and would have made himself an honest fellow, when it couldn't be helped." "Good, good," returned Gurta, as if she had got something very pleasant in her mouth. "Ah, that is good! But he did not escape on that score, I do trust." "They pulled him to pieces all the more cheerfully," said Juba. "Pulled him to pieces, limb by limb, joint by joint, eh?" answered Gurta. "Did they skin him? Did they do anything to his eyes or his tongue? Anyhow, it was too quickly, Juba. Slowly, leisurely, gradually. Yes, it's like a glutton to be quick about it. Taste him, handle him, play with him, that's luxury. But to bolt him, faugh!" "Caso Slade made a good end," said Juba. "He stood up for his views, and died like a man." "The gods smite him! But he has gone up, up," and she laughed, "up to what they call bliss and glory. Such glory! But he's out of our domain, you know. But he did not die easy." "The boys worried him a good deal," answered Juba. "But it's not quite in my line, mother, all this. I think you drink a pint of blood morning and evening, and thrive on it, old woman. It makes you merry, but it's too much for my stomach."
"Ah, my boy!" cried Gurta, "you'll improve in time, though you make wry faces now that you're young. Well, and have you brought me any news from the capital? Is any one getting a rise in the world, or a downfall? How blows the wind? Are there changes in the camp? This Decius, I suspect, will not last long."
"They all seem desperately frightened," said Juba, "lest they should not smite your friends hard enough, Gurta. Root and branch is the word. They'll have to make a few Christians for the occasion in order to kill them. And I almost think they're about it," he added thoughtfully. "They have to show that they are not surpassed by the rabble. 'Tis a pity Christians are so few, isn't it, mother?"
"Yes, yes," she said, "but we must crush them, grind them, many or few, and we shall, we shall. Callista's to come?"
"I don't see they are worse than other people," said Juba, "not at all, except that they are commonly sneaks. If Callista turns, why should not I turn too, mother, to keep her company and keep your hand in?"
"No, no, my boy," returned the witch, "you must serve my master. You're having your fling just now, but you will buckle to in good time. You must one day take some work with my merry men. Come here, child," said the fond mother, "and let me kiss you."
"Keep your kisses for your monkeys and goats and cats," answered Juba. "They're not to my taste, old dame. Master, my master! I won't have a master. I'll be nobody's servant. I'll never stand to be hired, nor cringe to a bully, nor quake before a rod. Please yourself, Gurta, I am a free man. You're my mother by courtesy only." Gurta looked at him savagely.
"Why, you're not going to be pious and virtuous, Juba. A choice saint you'll make. You shall be drawn for a picture."
"Why shouldn't I, if I choose?" said Juba. "If I must take service willy‐nilly, I'd any day prefer the others to that of your friend. I've not left the master to take the man."
"Blaspheme not the great gods," she answered, "or they'll do you a mischief yet."
"I say again," insisted Juba, "if I must lick the earth, it shall not be where your friend has trod. It shall be in my brother's fashion, rather than in yours, Gurta."
"Agellius!"
she shrieked out with such disgust that it is wonderful she uttered the name at all.
"Ah, you have not told me about him, boy. Well, is he safe in the pit, or in the stomach of a hyena?"
"He's alive," said Juba, "but he has not got it in him to be a Christian. Yes, he's safe with his uncle."
"Ah, Jucundus must ruin him, debauch him, and then we'll make away with him." "We must not be in a hurry," said Goethe. "It must be body and soul."
"No one shall touch him, craven as he is," answered Juba. "I despise him, but let him alone."
"Don't come across me," said Goethe sullenly. "I'll have my way. Why, you know I could smite you to the dust as well as him, if I chose."
"But you have not asked me about Callista," answered Juba. "It is really a capital joke, but she has got into prison for certain, for being a Christian. Fancy it! They caught her in the streets, and put her in the guard house, and have had her up for examination. You see, they want a Christian for the nonce. It would not do to have none such in prison, so they will flourish with her till Decius bolts from the scene."
"The Furies have her!" cried Goethe. "She is a Christian, my boy. I told you so long ago."
"Callista a Christian!" answered Juba. "Ha, ha! She and Agellius are going to make a match of it of some sort or other. They're thinking of other things than paradise."
"She and the old priest, more likely, more likely," said Goethe. "He's in prison with her, in the pit, as I trust."
"Your master has cheated you for once, old woman," said Juba. Goethe looked at him fiercely, and seemed waiting for his explanation. He began singing. She wheedled and coaxed, but he was no fool. He'd be his own master, he'd not be her tool. Not the little black Moor should send him to school. She foamed and she cursed, 'twas the same thing to him. She laid well her trap, but he carried his whim. The priest scuffled off, safe in life and in limb. Goethe was almost suffocated with passion.
"Cyprianus has not escaped, boy?"
she asked at length. "I got him off," said Juba, undauntedly. A shade as of Erebus passed over the witch's face, but she remained quite silent. "Mother, I am my own master," he continued. "I must break your assumption of superiority. I'm not a boy, though you call me so. I'll have my own way. Yes, I saved Cyprianus. You're a bloodthirsty old hag. Yes, I've seen your secret doings. Did not I catch you the other day practising on that little child? You had nailed him up by hands and feet against the tree, and were cutting him to pieces at your leisure, as he quivered and shrieked the while. You were examining or using his liver for some of your black purposes. It's not in my line, but you gloated over it, and when he wailed, you wailed in mimicry. You were panting with pleasure." Goethe was still silent, and had an expression on her face, awful from the intensity of its malignity. She had uttered a low, piercing whistle. "Yes," continued Juba, "you revelled in it. You chattered to the poor babe when it screamed, as a nurse to an infant. You called it pretty names, and squeaked out your satisfaction each time you stuck it. You old hag, I'm not of your breed, though they call us of kin. I don't fear you," he said, observing the expression of her countenance. "I don't fear the immortal devil." And he continued his song. "She beckoned the moon, and the moon came down. The green earth shrivelled beneath her frown, but a man's strong will can keep his own." While he was talking and singing, her call had been answered from the hut. An animal of some wonderful species had crept out of it, and proceeded to creep and crawl, mowing and twisting as it went along the trees and shrubs which rounded the grass plot. When it came up to the old woman, it crouched at her feet, and then rose up upon its hind legs and begged. She took hold of the uncouth beast, and began to fondle it in her arms, muttering something in its ear. At length, when Juba stopped for a moment in his song, she suddenly flung it right at him with great force, saying, "Take that!" She then gave utterance to a low inward laugh, and leaned herself back against the trunk of the tree upon which she was sitting, with her knees drawn up almost to her chin. The blow seemed to act on Juba as a shock on his nervous system, both from its violence and its strangeness. He stood still for a moment, and then without saying a word he turned away and walked slowly down the hill, as if in a maze. Then he sat down. In an instant he started again with a great cry, and began running at the top of his speed. He thought he heard a voice speaking in him, and however fast he ran, the voice, or whatever it was, kept up with him. He rushed through the underwood, trampling and crushing it under his feet, and scaring the birds and small game which lodged there. At last, exhausted, he stood still for breath, when he heard it say loudly and deeply, as if speaking with his own organs, "You cannot escape from yourself." Then a terror seized him. He fell down and fainted away. End of chapter 23. Chapter 24 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A mother's blessing. When his senses returned, his first impression was of something in him, not himself. He felt it in his breathing, he tasted it in his mouth. The brook which ran by Goethe's encampment had by this time become a streamlet, though still shallow. He plunged into it. A feeling came upon him as if he ought to drown himself had it been deeper. He rolled about in it, in spite of its flinty and rocky bed. When he came out of it, his tunic sticking to him, he tore it off his shoulders and let it hang round his girdle in shreds, as it might. The shock of the water, however, acted as a sedative upon him, and the coolness of the night refreshed him. He walked on for a while in silence. Suddenly the power within him began uttering, by means of his organs of speech, the most fearful blasphemies, words embodying conceptions which, had they come into his mind, he might indeed have borne with patience before this, or uttered in bravado, but which now filled him with inexpressible loathing, and a terror to which he had hitherto been quite a stranger. He had always in his heart believed in a God, but now he believed with a reality and intensity utterly new to him. He felt it as if he saw him. He felt there was a world of good and evil beings. He did not love the good or hate the evil, but he shrank from the one, and he was terrified at the other, and he felt himself carried away against his will, as the prey of some dreadful mysterious power which tyrannized over him. The day had closed, the moon had risen. He plunged into the thickest wood, and the trees seemed to him to make way for him. Still they seemed to moan and to creak as they moved out of their place. Soon he began to see that they were looking at him and exulting over his misery. They, of an inferior nature, had had no gift which they could abuse and lose, and they remained in that honour and perfection in which they were created. Birds of the night flew out of them, reptiles slunk away, yet soon he began to be surrounded wherever he went by a circle of owls, bats, ravens, crows, snakes, wild cats, and apes, which were always looking at him, but somehow made way, retreating before him, and yet forming again and in order as he marched along. He had passed through the wing of the forest which he had entered, and penetrated into the more mountainous country. He ascended the heights. He was a taller, stronger man than he had been. He went forward with a preternatural vigour, and flourished his arms with the excitement of some venous or gaseous intoxication. He heard the roar of the wild beasts echoed along the woody ravines which were cut into the solid mountain rock, with a reckless feeling as if he could cope with them. As he passed the dens of the lion, leopard, hyena, jackal, wild boar, and wolf, there he saw them sitting at the entrance, or stopping suddenly as they prowled along, and eyeing him, but not daring to approach. He strode along from rock to rock and over precipices, with the certainty and ease of some giant in Eastern fable. Suddenly a beast of prey came across him. In a moment he had torn up by the roots the stump of a wild vine plant which was near him, had thrown himself upon his foe before it could act on the aggressive, had flung it upon its back, forced the weapon into its mouth, and was stamping on its chest. He knocked the life out of the furious animal, and crying, "Take that!" tore its flesh, and applying his mouth to the wound, sucked a draught of its blood. He has passed over the mountain, and has descended its side. Bristling shrubs, swamps, precipitous banks, rushing torrents, are no obstacle to his course. He has reached the brow of a hill, with a deep, placid river at the foot of it, just as the dawn begins to break. It is a lovely prospect, which every step he takes is becoming more definite and more various in the daylight. Masses of oleander of great beauty, with their red blossoms, fringed the river, and tracked out its course into the distance. The bank of the hill below him, and on the right and left, was a maze of fruit trees, about which nature, if it were not the hand of man, had had no thought except that they should be all together there. The wild olive, the pomegranate, the citron, the date, the mulberry, the peach, the apple, and the walnut formed a sort of spontaneous orchard. Across the water, groves of palm trees waved their long and graceful branches in the morning breeze. The stately and solemn ilex, marshalled into long avenues, showed the way to substantial granges or luxurious villas. The green turf or grass was spread out beneath, and here and there flocks and herds were emerging out of the twilight, and growing distinct upon the eye. Elsewhere the ground rose up into sudden eminences, crowned with chestnut woods, or with plantations of cedar and acacia, or wildernesses of the cork tree, the turpentine, the caroba, the wild poplar, and the Phoenician juniper, while overhead ascended the clinging tendrils of the hop, and an underwood of myrtle clothed their stems and roots. A profusion of wild flowers carpeted the ground far and near. Juba stood and gazed till the sun rose opposite to him, envying, repining, hating, like Satan looking in upon Paradise. The wild mountains, or the locust-smitten track, would have better suited the tumult of his mind. It would have been a relief to him to have retreated from so fair a scene, and to have retraced his steps. But he was not his own master, and was hurried on, sorely against his determined, strong resolve and will, crying out and protesting and shuddering. The youth was forced along into the fulness of beauty and blessing with which he was so little in tune. With rage and terror he recognized that he had no part in his own movements, but was a mere slave. In spite of himself he must go forward, and behold a peace and sweetness which witnessed against him. He dashed down through the thick grass, plunged into the water, and without rest or respite began a second course of aimless toil and travail through the day. The savage dogs of the villages howled and fled from him as he passed by. Beasts of burden on their way to market, which he overtook or met, stood still, foamed and trembled. The bright birds, the blue jay and golden oriole, hid themselves under leaves and grass. The storks, a religious and domestic bird, stopped their sharp clattering note from the high tree or farmhouse turret, where they had placed their nests. The very reptiles skulked away from his shadow, as if it were poisonous. The boors, who were at their labour in the fields, suspended it to look at one whom the Furies were lashing and whirling on. Hour passed after hour. The sun attained its zenith and then declined. But this dreadful compulsory race continued. Oh, what would he have given for 5 minutes of oblivion, of slumber, of relief from the burning thirst which now consumed him! But the master within him ruled his muscles and his joints, and the intense pain of weariness had no concomitant prostration of strength. Suddenly he began to laugh hideously, and he went forward dancing and singing loud, and playing antics. He entered a hovel, made faces at the children, till one of them fell into convulsions, and he ran away with another. And when some country people pursued him, he flung the child in their faces, saying, "Take that!" and said he was Pentheus, king of Thebes, of whom he had never heard, about to solemnize the orgies of Bacchus, and he began to spout a chorus of Greek, a language he had never learned or heard spoken. Now it is evening again, and he has come up to a village grove, where the rustics were holding a feast in honour of Pan, the hideous brutal god, with yawning mouth, horned head, and goat's feet, was placed in a rude shed, and a slaughtered lamb, decked with flowers, lay at his feet. The peasants were frisking before him, boys and women, when they were startled by the sight of a gaunt, wild, mysterious figure, which began to dance too. He flung and capered about with such vigour that they ceased their sport to look on, half with awe and half as a diversion. Suddenly he began to groan and to shriek, as if contending with himself, and willing and not willing some new act, and the struggle ended in his falling on his hands and knees and crawling like a quadruped towards the idol. When he got near, his attitude was still more servile; still groaning and shuddering, he laid himself flat on the ground, and wriggled to the idol as a worm, and lapped up with his tongue the mingled blood and dust which lay about the sacrifice. And then again, as if nature had successfully asserted her own dignity, he jumped up high in the air, and falling on the god, broke him to pieces, and scampered away out of pursuit before the lookers on recovered from their surprise. Another restless, fearful night amid the open country; but it seemed as if the worst had passed, and though still under the heavy chastisement of his pride, there was now more in Juba of human action and of effectual will. The day broke, and he found himself on the road to Sicca. The beautiful outline of the city was right before him. He passed his brother's cottage and garden. It was a wreck, the trees torn up, the fences broken down, and the room pillaged of the little that could be found there. He went on to the city, crying out, "Agellius!" The gate was open, and he entered. He went on to the Forum. He crossed to the house of Jucundus. Few people as yet were stirring in the place. He looked up at the wall. Suddenly, by the help of projections and other irregularities of the brickwork, he mounted up upon the flat roof, and dropped down along the tiles, through the impluvium into the middle of the house. He went softly into Agellius's closet, where he was asleep. He roused him with the name of Callista, threw his tunic upon him, which was by his side, put his boots into his hands, and silently beckoned him to follow him. When he hesitated, he still whispered to him, "Callista," and at length seized him and led him on. He unbarred the street door, and with a movement of his arm, more like a blow than a farewell, thrust him into the street. Then he barred again the door upon him, and lay down himself upon the bed which Agellius had left. His good angel, we may suppose, had gained a point in his favour, for he lay quiet and fell into a heavy sleep. End of chapter 24. Chapter 25 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Callista in durance. We will hope that the reader, as well as Agellius, is attracted by the word Callista, and wishes to know something about her fate; nay, perhaps finds fault with us, as having suffered him so long to content himself with the chance and second-hand information which Jucundus or Juba has supplied. If we have been wanting in due consideration for him, we now trust to make up for it. When Callista, then, had so boldly left the cottage to stop the intruders, she had in one important point reckoned without her host. She spoke Latin fluently herself, and could converse with the townspeople, most of whom could do the same. But it was otherwise with the inhabitants of the country, numbers of whom, as we have said, were in Sicca on the day of the outbreak. The two fellows whom she went out to withstand knew neither her nor the Latin tongue. They were of a race which called itself Canaanite, and really was so. Huge, gigantic men, who looked like the sons of Enoch, described in Holy Writ. They knew nothing of roads or fences, and had scrambled up the hill as they could, the shortest way, and being free from the crowd, with far more expedition than had they followed the beaten track. She and they could not understand each other's speech, but her appearance spoke for her, and in consequence they seized on her as their share of the booty, and without more ado carried her off towards Sicca. As they came up by a route of their own, so they returned, and entered the city by a gate more to the south, not the Septimian, a happy circumstance, as otherwise she would have stood every chance of being destroyed in that wholesale massacre which the soldiery inflicted on the crowd as it returned. These giants, then, got possession of Callista, and she entered Sicca upon the shoulder of one of them, who danced in with no greater inconvenience than if he was carrying on it a basket of flowers or a box of millinery. Here the party met with the city police, who were stationed at the gate. "Down with your live luggage, you rascals," they said in their harsh Punic. "What have you to do with plunder of this kind? How came you by her?" "She's one of those Christian rats, your worship," answered the fellow, who, strong as he was, did not relish a contest with some dozen of armed men. "Long live the Emperor! We'll teach her to eat asses' heads another time, and brew fevers. I found her with a party of Christians. She's nothing but a witch, and she knows the consequences." "Let her go, you drunken animal," said the constable, still keeping his distance. "I'll never believe any woman is a Christian, let alone so young a one. And now I look at her, as far as I can see by this light, I think she's priestess of one of the great temples up there." "She can turn herself into anything," said the other of her capturers, "young or old. I saw her one night near Madora a month ago, in the tombs, in the shape of a black cat." "Away with you both, in the name of the Suffetes of Sicca and all the magistracy!" cried the official. "Give up your prisoner to the authorities of the place, and let the law take its course." But the Canaanites did not seem disposed to give her up, and neither party liking to attack the other, a compromise took place. "Well," said the guardian of the night, "the law must be vindicated, and the peace preserved. My friends, you must submit to the magistrates. But since she happens to be on your shoulder, my man, let her even remain there, and we depute you, as a beast of burden, to carry her for us, thereby to save us the trouble. Here, child," he continued, "you're our prisoner, so you shall plead your own cause in the Popina there. Long live Decius, pious and fortunate! Long live this ancient city, colony, and municipium! Cheer up, my lass, and sing us a stave or two as we go, for I'll pledge a cyanthus of unmixed that, if you choose, you can warble notes as sweet as the manna gum." Callista was silent, but she was perfectly collected, and ready to avail herself of any opportunity to better her condition. They went on towards the Forum, where a police office, as we now speak, was situated, but did not reach it without an adventure. The Roman military force at Sicca was not more than a century of men. The greater number were at this moment at the great gate, waiting for the mob. A few, in parties of 3 and 4, were patrolling the city. Several of these were at the entrance of the Forum when the party came up to it, and it happened that a superior officer, who was an assistant to what may be called the military resident of the place, a young man, on whom much of the duty of the day had devolved, was with the soldiers. She had known him as a friend of her brother's, and recognized him in the gloom, and at once took advantage of the meeting. "Help!" she said, "gentlemen, help! Calphurnius! These rascals are carrying me off to some den of their own." The tribune at once knew her voice. "What!" he cried, with great astonishment, "what, my pretty Greek? You most base, infamous, and unmannerly scoundrels, down with her this instant! What have you to do with that young lady, you villains, unless you would have me crack your African skulls with the hilt of my sword? Down with her, I say!" There was no resisting a Roman voice, but prompt obedience is a rarity, and the ruffians began to parley. "My noble master,"
said the constable. "She's our prisoner. Jove preserve you, and Bacchus and Ceres bless you, my lord tribune, and long life to the Emperor Decius in these bad times. But she is a rioter, my lord, one of the ringleaders, and a Christian, and a witch to boot." "Cease your vile gutturals, you animal," cried the officer, "or I will ram them down your throat with my pike to digest them. Put down the lady, beast! Are you thinking twice about it? Go, Lucius," he said to a private, "kick him away, and bring the woman here." Callista was surrendered, but the fellow, sullen at the usage he had met with, and spiteful against Calphurnius as the cause of it, cried out maliciously, "Mind which you are at, noble sir. It is not our affair. You can fry your own garlic. But an emperor is an emperor, and an edict is an edict, and a Christian is a Christian, and I don't know what high places will say to it, but it's your affair. Take notice," he continued, as he got to a safer distance, raising his voice still higher, that the soldiers might hear, "yon girl is a Christian priestess, caught in a Christian assembly, sacrificing asses and eating children for the overthrow of the emperor, and the ruin of his loyal city of Sicca, and I have been interrupted in the discharge of my duty, I, a constable of the place. See whether Calphurnius will not bring again upon us the plague, the murrain, the locusts, and all manner of larvæ and maniæ, before the end of the story." This speech perplexed Calphurnius, as it was intended. It was impossible he could dispose of Callista as he wished, with such a charge formally uttered in the presence of his men. He knew how serious the question of Christianity was at that moment, and how determined the imperial government was on the eradication of its professors. He was a good soldier, devoted to headquarters, and had no wish to compromise himself with his superiors, or to give bystanders an advantage over him by setting a prisoner at liberty without inquiry, who had been taken in a Christian's house. He muttered an oath, and said to the soldiers, "Well, my lads, to the triumvirate with her, since it must be so. Cheer up, my star of the morning, bright beam of Hellas. It is only as a matter of form, and you will be set at liberty as soon as they look on you." And with these words he led the way to the Officium. But the presiding genius of the Officium was less accommodating than he had anticipated. It might be that he was jealous of the soldiery, or of their particular interference, or indignant at the butchery at the great gate, of which the news had just come, or out of humour with the day's work, and especially with the Christians. At any rate, Calphurnius found he had better have taken a bolder step, and have carried her as a prisoner to the camp. However, nothing was now left for him but to depart, and Callista fell again into the hands of the city, though of the superior functionaries, who procured her a lodging for the night, and settled to bring her up for examination next morning. The morning came, and she was had up. What passed did not transpire, but the issue was that she was remanded for a further hearing, and was told she might send to her brother and acquaint him where she was. He was allowed one interview with her, and he came away almost out of his senses, saying she was bewitched, and fancied herself a Christian. What precisely she had said to him which gave this impression he could hardly say, but it was plain there must be something wrong, or there would not be that public process and formal examination which was fixed for the third day afterwards. End of chapter 25. Chapter 26 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. What can it all mean? Were the origin of Juba's madness, or whatever the world would call it, of a character which admitted of light writing about it, much might be said on the surprise of the clear-headed, narrow-minded, positive, and easy-going Jucundus, when he found one nephew substituted for another, and had to give over his wonder at Agellius in order to commence a series of acts of amazement and consternation at Juba. He summoned Jupiter and Juno, Bacchus, Ceres, Pomona, Neptune, Mercury, Minerva, and great Rome, to witness the marvellous occurrence, and then he had recourse to the infernal gods, Pluto and Proserpine, down to Cerberus, if he be one of them. But after all, there the portent was, in spite of all the deities which Olympus or Arcadia or Latium ever bred.
and at length it had a nervous effect upon the old gentleman's system, and for the first evening after it he put all his good things from him, and went to bed supperless and songless. What had been Juba's motive in the exploit which so unpleasantly affected his uncle, it is of course quite impossible to say. Whether his mention of Callista's name was intended to be for the benefit of her soul, or the ruin of Agellius's, must be left in the obscurity in which the above narrative presents it to us. So far alone is certain, though it does not seem to throw light on the question, that on his leaving his uncle's house in the course of the forenoon, which he did, without being pressed to stay, he was discovered prancing and gesticulating in the neighbourhood of Callista's prison, so as to excite the attention of the apparitor or constable who guarded the entrance, and who, alarmed at his wildness, sent for some of his fellows, and with their assistance repelled the intruder, who thereupon, scudding out at the eastern gate, was soon lost in the passes of the mountain. To one thing, however, we may pledge ourselves, that Juba had no intention of shaking, even for one evening, the nerves of Jucundus. Yet shaken they were, till about the same time 24 hours afterwards. And when in that depressed state he saw nothing but misery on all sides of him. Juba was lost, Agellius worse. Of course he had joined himself to his sect. He should never see him again, and how should he ever hold up his head? Well, he only hoped Agellius would not be boiled in a cauldron, or roasted at a slow fire. If this were done, he positively must leave Sicca, and the most thriving trade which any man had in the whole of the proconsulate. And then that little Callista! Ah, what a real calamity was there! Anyhow, he had lost her, and what should he do for a finisher of his fine work in marble or metal? She was a treasure in herself. Altogether the heavens were very dark, and it was scarcely possible for any one who knew well his jovial cast of countenance to keep from laughing, whatever his real sympathy, at the unusual length and blankness which were suddenly imposed upon it. While he sat thus at his shop window, which as it were framed him for the contemplation of passers by, on the day of the escape of Agellius, and the day before Callista's public examination, Aristo rushed in upon him in a state of far more passionate and more reasonable grief. He had called indeed the day before, but he found a pleasure in expending his distress upon others, and he came again to get rid of its insupportable weight by discharging it in a torrent of tears and exclamations. However, at first the words of both moved slow, as the poet says, and went off in a sort of dropping fire. "Well," said Jucundus in a depressed tone, "he's not come to you, of course?" "Who?" "Agellius." "Oh, Agellius! No, he's not with me." Then after a pause Aristo added, "Why should he be?" "Oh, I don't know. I thought he might be. He's gone. He's been gone since early morning." "Indeed! No, I don't know where he is." "How came he with you?" "I told you yesterday, but you have forgotten. I was sheltering him, but he's gone for ever." "Indeed! And his brother's mad, horribly mad," and he slapped his hand against his thigh. "I always thought it," answered Aristo. "Did you? Oh, yes, so it is; but it's very different from what it ever was. The Furies have got hold of him with a vengeance. He's frantic. Oh, if you had seen him! 2 boys, both mad. It's all the father." "I thought you'd like to hear something about dear sweet Callista," said her brother. "Yes, I should indeed," answered Jucundus. "By Esculapius, they're all mad together." "Well, it is like madness," cried Aristo, with great vehemence. "The world's going mad," answered Jucundus, who was picking up, since he began to talk, an exercise which was decidedly good for him. "We are all going mad. I shall get crazed. The townspeople are crazed already. What an abominable, brutal piece of business was that 3 days ago! I put up my shutters. Did it come near you?" all on account of one or two beggarly Christians and my poor boy. What harm could 2 or 3, toads and vipers though they be, do here? They might have been trodden down easily. It's another thing at Carthage. Catch the ringleaders, I say, and make examples. The foxes escape, and our poor ganders suffer." Aristo, pierced with his own misery, had no heart or head to enter into the semi-political ideas of Jucundus, who continued, "Yes, it's no good. The empire's coming to pieces. Mark my words. I told you so. If those beasts were let alone, they have been let alone. Remedies are too late. Decius will do no good. No one's safe. Farewell, my friends, I am going. Like poor dear Callista I shall be in prison, and like her find myself dumb. Yes, Callista, how did you find her?" "Oh dear, sweet, suffering girl!" cried her brother. "Yes, indeed," answered Jucundus. "Yes," meditatively, "she is a dear, sweet, suffering girl. I thought he might perhaps have taken her off. That was my hope. He was so set upon hearing where she was, whether she could be got out. It struck me he had made the best of his way to her. She could do anything with him, and she loved him. She did, I'm convinced of it. Nothing shall convince me otherwise. Bring them together, I said, and they will rush into each other's arms. But they're bewitched. The whole world's bewitched. Mark my words, I have an idea who is at the bottom of this." "Oh," groaned out Aristo, "I care not for top or bottom. I care not for the whole world, or for anything at all. But Callista, if you could have seen the dear patient sufferer!" And the poor fellow burst into a flood of tears. "But bear up, bear up," said Jucundus, who by this time was considerably better. "Show yourself a man, my dear Aristo. These things must be; they are the lot of human nature. You remember what the tragedian says. No, it's the comedian. It's Menander. 'To Orcus and Erebus with all the tragedy and comedy that ever was spouted!'" exclaimed Aristo. "Can you do nothing for me? Can't you give me a crumb of consolation or sympathy, encouragement or suggestion? I am a stranger in the country, and so is this dear sister of mine, whom I was so proud of, and who has been so good and kind and gentle and sweet. She loved me so much, she never grudged me anything. She let me do just what I would with her. Come here, go there, it was just as I would. There we were, 2 orphans together, 10 years since, when I was double her age. She wished to stay in Greece, but she came to this detestable Africa, all for me. She would be gay and bright when I would have her so. She had no will of her own, and she set her heart upon nothing, and was pleased anywhere. She had not an enemy in the world. I protest she is worth all the gods and goddesses that ever were hatched. And here in this ill-omened Africa the evil eye has looked at her, and she thinks herself a Christian, when she is just as much a hippogriff or a chimera." "Well, but Aristo," said Jucundus, "I was going to tell you who is at the bottom of it. Callista's mad, Agellius is mad, Juba is mad, and Strabo was mad; but it was his wife, old Gurta, that drove him mad. And there, I think, is the beginning of our troubles. Oh, come in, Cornelius!" he cried, seeing his Roman friend outside, and relapsing for the moment into his lugubrious tone. "Come in, Cornelius, and give us some comfort, if you can. Well, this is like a friend. I know if you can help me, you will." Cornelius answered that he was going back to Carthage in a day or 2, and came to embrace him, and had hoped to have a parting supper before he went. "That's kind," answered Jucundus. "But first tell me all about this dreadful affair, for you are in the secrets of the capital. Have they any clue what has become of my poor Agellius?" Cornelius had not heard of the young man's troubles, and was full of consternation at the news. "What! Agellius really a Christian?" he said, "and at such a moment? Why, I thought you talked of some young lady who was to keep him in order." "She is a Christian too," replied Jucundus, and a silence ensued. "It's a bad world," he continued. "She's imprisoned by the Triumviri. What will be the end of it?" Cornelius shook his head, and looked mysterious. "You don't mean it," said Jucundus. "Not anything so dreadful, I do trust, Cornelius. Not the stake?" Cornelius still looked gloomy and pompous. "Nothing in the way of torture?" he went on. "Not the rack or the pitchfork?" "It's a bad business, on your own showing," said Cornelius. "It's a bad business." "Can you do nothing for us, Cornelius?" cried Aristo. "The great people in Carthage are your friends. Oh, Cornelius, I'd do anything for you. I'd be your slave. She's no more a Christian than great Jove. She has nothing about her of the cut, not a shred of her garment, or a turn of her hair. She's a Greek from head to foot, within and without. She's as bright as the day. Ah, we have no friends here. Dear Callista, you'll be lost because you are a foreigner." And the passionate youth began to tear his hair. "Oh, Cornelius," he continued, "if you can do anything for us, oh, she shall sing and dance to you. She shall come and kneel down to you, and embrace your knees, and kiss your feet, as I do, Cornelius." And he knelt down, and would have taken hold of Cornelius's beard. Cornelius had never been addressed with so poetical a ceremonial, which nevertheless he received with awkwardness indeed, but with satisfaction. "I hear from you," he said with pomposity, "that your sister is in prison on suspicion of Christianity. The case is a simple one. Let her swear by the genius of the emperor, and she is free. Let her refuse it, and the law must take its course." And he made a slight bow. "Well, but she is under a delusion," persisted Aristo, "which cannot last long. She says distinctly that she is not a Christian. Is not that decisive? But then she won't burn incense, she won't swear by Rome. She tells me she does not believe in Jupiter, nor I. Can anything be more senseless? It is the act of a madwoman, I say. My girl, the question is, are you to be brought to shame? Are you to die by the public sword, die in torments? Oh, I shall go mad as well as she," he screamed out. "She was so clever, so witty, so sprightly, so imaginative, so versatile. Why, there's nothing she couldn't do. She could model, paint, play on the lyre, sing, act. She could work with the needle, she could embroider. She made this girdle for me. It's all that Agellius. It's Agellius. I beg your pardon, Jucundus, but it is." And he threw himself on the ground, and rolled in the dust. "I have been telling our young friend," said Jucundus to Cornelius, "to exert self‐control, and to recollect Menander. Ne quid nimis. Grieving does no good. But these young fellows, it's no use at all speaking to them. Do you think you could do anything for us, Cornelius?" "Why," answered Cornelius, "since I have been here, I've fallen in with a very sensible man, and a man of remarkably sound political opinions. He has a great reputation. He is called Polemo, and is one of the professors at the Mercury. He seems to me to go to the root of these subjects, and I'm surprised how well we agreed. He's a Greek, as well as this young gentleman's sister. I should recommend him to go to Polemo. If any one could disabuse her mind, it is he." "True, true," cried Aristo, starting up. "But no, you can do it better. You have power with government. The proconsul will listen to you. The magistrates are afraid of him. They don't wish to touch the poor girl, not they. But there's such a noise everywhere, and so much ill blood, and so many spies and informers, and so much mistrust. But why should it come upon Callista? Why should she be a sacrifice? But you'd oblige the Duumvirs as much as me in getting her out of the scrape. But what good would it do if they took her dear life? Only get us the respite of a month. The delusion would vanish in a month. Get 2 months if you can,
or as long as you can, Perhaps they would let us steal out of the country, and no one the wiser, and no harm to any one. It was a bad job our coming here." "We know nothing at Rome of feelings and intentions and motives and distinctions," said Cornelius, "and we know nothing of understandings, connivances, and evasions. We go by facts. Rome goes by facts. The question is, what is the fact? Does she burn incense, or does she not? Does she worship the ass, or does she not? However, we'll see what can be done." And so he went on, informing the pair of mourners that as far as his influence extended, he would do something in behalf both of Agellius and Callista. End of chapter 26. Chapter 27 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Am I a Christian? The sun had now descended for the last time before the solemn day which was charged with the fate of Callista. And what was the state of mind of one who excited such keen interest in the narrow circle within which she was known? And how does it differ from what it was some weeks before, when Agellius last saw her? She would have been unable to say herself. So is the kingdom of God, as if a man should cast seed into the earth, and should sleep and rise night and day, and the seed should spring and grow up, whilst he knoweth not. She might indeed have been able afterwards, on looking back, to say many things of herself, and she would have recognized that while she was continually differing from herself, in that she was changing, yet it was not a change which involved contrariety, but one which expanded itself in, as it were, concentric circles, and only fulfilled, as time went on, the promise of its beginning. Every day as it came was, so to say, the child of the preceding, the parent of that which followed, and the end to which she tended could not get beyond the aim with which she set out. Yet, had she been asked, at the time of which we speak, where was her principle and her consistency, what was her logic, or whether she acted on reason, or on impulse, or on feeling, or in fancy, or in passion, she would have been reduced to silence. What did she know about herself, but that, to her surprise, the more she thought over what she heard of Christianity, the more she was drawn to it, and the more it approved itself to her whole soul, and the more it seemed to respond to all her needs and aspirations, and the more intimate was her presentiment that it was true. The longer it remained on her mind as an object, the more it seemed, unlike the mythology or the philosophy of her country, or the political religion of Rome, to have an external reality and substance, which deprived objections to it of their power, and showed them to be at best but difficulties and perplexities. But then again, if she had been asked what was Christianity, she would have been puzzled to give an answer. She would have been able to mention some particular truths which it taught, but neither to give them their definite and distinct shape, nor to describe the mode in which they were realized. She would have said, "I believe what has been told me, as from heaven, by Chione, Agellius, and Cæcilius," and it was clear she could say nothing else. What the three told her in common and in concord was at once the measure of her creed and the ground of her acceptance of it. It was that wonderful unity of sentiment and belief in persons so dissimilar from each other, so distinct in their circumstances, so independent in their testimony, which recommended to her the doctrine which they were so unanimous in teaching. She had long given up any belief in the religion of her country. As to philosophy, it dwelt only in conjecture and opinion, whereas the very essence of religion was, as she felt, a recognition of the worshippers on the part of the object of it. Religion could not be without hope. To worship a being who did not speak to us, recognize us, love us, was not religion. It might be a duty,
it might be a merit, but her instinctive notion of religion was the soul's response to a God who had taken notice of the soul. It was loving intercourse, or it was a name. Now the three witnesses who had addressed her about Christianity had each of them made it to consist in the intimate divine presence in the heart. It was the friendship or mutual love of person with person. Here was the very teaching which already was so urgently demanded both by her reason and her heart, which she found nowhere else, which she found existing one and the same in a female slave, in a country youth, in a learned priest. This was the broad impression which they made upon her mind. When she turned to consider more in detail what it was they taught, or what was implied in that idea of religion which so much approved itself to her, she understood them to say that the Creator of heaven and earth, almighty, all good, clothed in all the attributes which philosophy gives him, the Infinite, had loved the soul of man so much, and her soul in particular, that he had come upon earth in the form of a man, and in that form had gone through sufferings in order to unite all souls to him, that he desired to love and to be loved, that he had said so, that he had called on man to love him, and did actually bring to pass this loving intercourse of him and man in those souls who surrendered themselves to him. She did not go much further than this, but as much as this was before her mind morning, noon, and night. It pleaded in her, it importuned her, it would not be rebuffed. It did not mind her moods, or disgusts, or doubts, or denials, or dismissals, but came again and again. It rose before her, in spite of the contempt, reproach, and persecution which the profession of it involved. It smiled upon her, it made promises to her, it opened eternal views to her, and it grew upon her convictions in clearness of perception, in congruity, and in persuasiveness. Moreover, the more she thought of Chione, of Agellius, and of Cæcilius, the more surely did she discern that this teaching wrought in them a something which she had not. They had about them a simplicity, a truthfulness, a decision, an elevation, a calmness, and a sanctity to which she was a stranger, which spoke to her heart and absolutely overcame her. The image of Cæcilius in particular came out prominently and eloquently in her memory, not in his words so much as in his manner. In spite of what she had injuriously said to him, she really felt drawn to worship him, as if he were the shrine and the home of that presence to which he bore such solemn witness. Oh, the change, when, as if in punishment for her wild words against him, she found herself actually in the hands of lawless men who were as far below her in sentiment as he was above her! Oh, the change, when she was dizzied by their brutal vociferations and rapid motion, and that breath and atmosphere of evil which steamed up from the rankness of their impiety! Oh, the thankfulness which rose up in her heart, though but vaguely directed to an object, when she found the repose and quiet, though it was that of a prison. For young as she was, she had become tired of all things that were seen, and had no strong desire except for meditation on the great truths which she did not know. One day passes, and then another, and now the morning and the hour is come when she must appear before the magistrates of Sicca. With dread, with agitation, she looks forward to the moment. She has not yet a peace within her. Her peace is the stillness of the room in which she is imprisoned. She knows it will pass away when she leaves it. She knows that again she must be in the hands of cruel, godless men, with whom she has no sympathy. But she has no stay whereon to lean in the terrible trial. Her brother comes to her. He affects to forget her perverseness or delusion. He comes to her with a smile, and throws his arms around her, and Callista repels from some indescribable feeling, his ardent caress, as if she were no longer his. He has come to accompany her to court, by an indulgence which he had obtained, to support her there, to carry her through, and to take her back in triumph home. My sister, why that strange, piteous look upon thy countenance? Why that paleness of thy cheek? Why that whisper of thy lips? Why those wistful, gentle pleadings of thine eyes? Sweet eyes, and brow, and cheek, in which I have ever prided myself, why so backward, why so distant and unfriendly? Am I not come to rescue thee from a place where thou never shouldst have been, where thou ne'er shalt be again? Callista, what is this mystery? Speak." Such as this was the mute expostulation conveyed in Aristo's look, and in the fond grasp of his hand, while treading down forcibly within him his memory and his fears of her great change. He determined she should be to him still all that she had ever been. But how altered was that look, and how relaxed that grasp, when at length her misery found words, and she said to him in agitation, "My time is short. I want some Christian, a Christian priest." It was as though she had never shown any tendency before to the proscribed religion. The words came to him with the intensity of something new and unimagined hitherto. He clasped his hands in emotion, turned white, and could but say, "Callista!" If she had made confession of the most heinous of crimes, if she had spoken of murder, or some black treachery against himself, of some enormity too great for words, it might have been. But his sister, his pride and delight, after all, and certainly a Christian! Better far had she said she was leaving him for ever, to abandon herself to the degrading service of the temples. Better had she said she had taken hemlock, or had an asp in her bosom, than that she should choose to go out of the world with the tortures, the ignominy, the malediction of the religion of slaves. Time waits for no man, nor does the court of justice, nor the subsellia of the magistrate. The examination is to be held in the basilica at the Forum, and it requires from us a few words of explanation beforehand. The local magistrates then could only try the lesser offences, and decide civil suits. Cases of suspected Christianity were reserved for the Roman authorities. Still, preliminary examinations were not unfrequently conducted by the city duumvirs, or even in what may be called the police courts; and this may have especially been the case in the proconsulates. Propraetors and presidents were in the appointment of the emperor, and joined in their persons the supreme civil and military authority. Such provinces perhaps were better administered, but there would be more of arbitrariness in their rule, and it would not be so acceptable to the ruled. The proconsuls, on the other hand, were representatives of the Senate, and had not the military force directly in their hands. The natural tendency of this arrangement was to create, on the one hand, a rivalry between the civil and military establishments, and on the other to create a friendly feeling between the proconsul and the local magistracy. Thus, not long before the date of this history, we read of Gordian, the proconsul, enjoying a remarkable popularity in his African province; and when the people rose against the exactions of the imperial procurator, as referred to in a former page, they chose and supported Gordian against him. But however this might be in general, so it was at this time at Sicca that the proconsular officium and the city magistrates were on a good understanding with each other, whereas there was some collision between the latter and the military. Not much depends in the conduct of our story upon this circumstance, but it must be taken into account for the examination of Callista in the Forum, and for some other details which may follow before we come to the end of it. The populace was collected about the gates and within the ample space of the basilica, but they gave expression to no strong feeling on the subject of a Christian delinquent. The famine, the sickness, and above all the lesson which they had received so lately from the soldiers, had both diminished their numbers and cowed their spirit. They were sullen too, and resentful, and with the changeableness proverbial in a multitude, had rather have witnessed the beheading of a magistrate, or the burning of a tribune, than the torture and death of a dozen of wretched Christians. Besides, they had had a glut of Christian blood. A reaction of feeling had taken place, and in spite of the suspicion of witchcraft, the youth and the beauty of Callista recommended her to their compassion. The magistrates were seated on the subsellia, one of the duumvirs presiding, in his white robe bordered with purple, his lictors, with staves not fasces, standing behind him. In the vestibule of the court, to confront the prisoner on her first entrance, were the usual instruments of torture. The charge was one which can only be compared, in the estimation of both state and people in that day, to that of witchcraft, poisoning, parricide, or other monstrous iniquity in Christian times. There were the heavy boiæ, a yoke for the neck, of iron or of wood; the fetters; the nervi or stocks, in which hands and feet were inserted at distances from each other which strained or dislocated the joints. There too were the virgæ, or rods with thorns in them; the flagra, lori, and plumbati, whips and thongs, cutting with iron or bruising with lead; the heavy clubs, the hook for digging into the flesh; the ungula, said to have been a pair of scissors; the scorpio and pecten, iron combs or rakes for tearing; and there was the wheel fringed with spikes, on which the culprit was stretched, and there was the fire ready lighted, with the water hissing and groaning in the large cauldrons which were placed upon it. Callista had lost for ever that noble intellectual composure of which we have several times spoken. She shuddered at what she saw, and almost fainted, and while waiting for her summons, leaned heavily against the merciless Cornicularius at her side. At length the judge began: "Let the servant from the officium stand forth." The officialis answered that he had brought a prisoner charged with Christianity. She had been brought to him by the military on the night of the riot. The scriba then read out the deposition of one of the stationarii, to the effect that he and his fellow soldiers had received her from the hands of the civic force on the night in question, and had brought her to the office of the triumvirs. "Bring forward the prisoner," said the judge. She was brought forward. "Here she is," answered the officialis, according to the prescribed form. "What is your name?" said the judge. She answered, "Callista." The judge then asked if she was a free woman or a slave. She answered, "Free, the daughter of Orsilochus, lapidary, of Proconnesus." Some conversation then went on among the magistrates as to her advocate or defensor. Aristo presented himself, but the question arose whether he was togatus. He was known, however, to several magistrates, and was admitted to stand by his sister. Then the scriba read the charge, viz., that Callista was a Christian, and refused to sacrifice to the gods. It was a plain question of fact, which required neither witnesses nor speeches. At a sign from the duumvir, in came two priests, bringing in between them the small altar of Jupiter. The charcoal was ready lighted, the incense at the side, and the judge called to the prisoner to sprinkle it upon the flame for the good fortune of Decius and his son. All eyes were turned upon her. "I am not a Christian," she said. "I told you so before. I have never been to a Christian place of worship, nor taken any Christian oath, nor joined in any Christian sacrifice; and I should lie did I say that I was in any sense a Christian." There was a silence. Then the judge said, "Prove your words. There is the altar, the flame, and the incense. Sacrifice to the genius of the emperor." She said, "What can I do? I am not a Christian." The judges looked at each other, as much as to say, "It is the old story. It is that inexplicable, hateful obstinacy, which will neither yield to reason, common sense, expediency, or fear." The duumvir only repeated the single word, "Sacrifice." She stopped a while, Then she came forward with a hurried step. "Oh, my fate!" she cried. "Why was I born? Why am I in this strait? I have no God. What can I do? I am abandoned. Why should I not do it?" She stopped, then she went right on to the altar. She took the incense. Suddenly she looked up to heaven, and started and threw it away. "I cannot, I dare not!" she cried out. There was a great sensation in court. "Evidently insane," said some of the more merciful of the decurions. "Poor thing, poor thing!" Her brother ran up to her, talked to her, conjured her, fell down on his knees to her, took her hand violently, and would have forced her to offer. In vain. All he could get from her was, "I am not a Christian. Indeed, I am not a Christian. I have nothing to do with them. Oh, the misery!" "She is mad," cried Aristo. "My lord judges, listen to me. She was seized by brutal ruffians during the riot, and the fright and shock have overcome her. Give her time. Oh, give her time, and she will get right. She's a good, religious girl. She has done more work for the temples than any girl in Sicca. Half the statues in the city are her finishing. Many of you, my lords, have her handiwork. She works with me. Do not add to my anguish in seeing her deranged by punishing her as a criminal, a Christian. Do not take her from me. Sentence her, and you end the whole matter. Give her a chance, and she will certainly be restored to the gods and to me. Will you put her to death because she is mad?" What was to be done? The court was obsequious to the proconsul, afraid of Rome, jealous that the mob should have been more forward than the magistracy. Had the city moved sooner, as soon as the edict came, there would have been no rising, no riot. Already they had been called on for a report about that riot, and an explanation. If ever they had need to look sharp what they were doing, it was now. On the other hand, Callista and her brothers had friends among the judges, as we have said, and their plea was at once obvious and reasonable. If she persists, she persists, and nothing can be said. We don't wish to be disloyal or careless of the emperor's commands. If she is obstinate, she must die; but she dies quite as usefully to us, with quite as much effect, a month hence as now. Not that we ask you to define a time on your own authority. Simply do this: write to Carthage for advice. The government can answer within an hour if it chooses. Merely say, here is a young woman who has ever been religious and well conducted, of great accomplishments, and known especially for her taste and skill in religious art, who since the day of the riot has suddenly refused to take the test. She can give no reason for her refusal, and protests she is not a Christian. Her friends say that the fright has turned her brain, but if kindly treated and kept quiet, she will come round, and do all that is required of her. What are we to do?" At last Callista's friends prevailed. It was decided that the judges should pass over this examination altogether, as if it had been rendered informal by Callista's conduct. Had they recognized it as a proper legal process, they must have sentenced and executed her. Such a decision was of this further advantage to her, that nothing was altered as to her place of confinement. Instead of being handed over to the state prison, she remained in her former lodging, though in custody, and was allowed to see her friends. There had been very little chance of her recovery, supposing she was mad, or of ever coming out, if she had once gone into the formidable carcere. Meanwhile the magistrates sent to Carthage for instructions. End of chapter 27. Chapter 28 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A sick call. Aristo was not a fellow to have very long distresses. He never would have died of love or of envy, for honour or for loss of property. But his present calamity was one of the greatest he could ever have, and weighed upon him as long as ever any one could. His love for his sister was real, but it would not do to look too closely into the grounds of it. If we are obliged to do so, we must confess to a suspicion that it lay rather in certain outward, nay, accidental attributes of Callista than in Callista herself. Did she lose her good looks, or her amiable, unresisting submission to his wishes, whatever they were, she would also lose her hold upon his affections. This is not to make any severe charge against him, considering how it is with the common run of brothers and sisters, husbands and wives. At the same time, most people certainly are haunted by the memory of the past, and love for auld lang syne, and this Aristo might indeed have had, and perhaps had not. He loved chiefly for the present, and by the hour. However, at the present time he was in a state of acute suffering, and under its paroxysm he bethought him again of Cornelius's advice, which he had rejected, to betake himself to Polemo. He had a distant acquaintance with him, sufficient for his purpose, and he called on him at the Mercury after the latter's lecture. Polemo was no fool, though steeped in affectation and self‐conceit, and Aristo fancied that his sister might be more moved by a philosophical compatriot than any one else. Polemo's astonishment, however, when the matter was proposed to him, surpassed words, and it showed how utterly Aristo was absorbed in his own misery, that the possibility of such a reception should not have occurred to him. What! He, the friend of Plotinus, of Rogatian, and the other noble men and women who were his fellow disciples at Rome! He, a member of the intellectual aristocracy of the metropolis of the world! What! He to visit a felon in prison! And when he found the felon was a Christian, he fully thought that Aristo had come to insult him, and was on the point of bidding him leave him to himself. Aristo, however, persisted, and his evident anguish, and some particulars which came out, softened him. Callista was a Greek, literate, or blue stocking. She had never indeed worn the philosophic pallium, as some Christian martyrs afterwards, if not before, have done, St. Catherine and St. Euphemia. But there was no reason why she should not do so. Polemo recollected having heard of her at the Capitol, and in the triclinium of one of the Decurions, as a lady of singular genius and attainments, and he lately had made an attempt to form a female class of hearers, and it would be a feather in his cap to make a convert of her. So, not many days after, one evening, accompanied by Aristo, he set out in his litter to the lodging where she was in custody. Not, however, without much misgiving when it came to the point, some shame, and a consequent visible awkwardness and stiffness in his manner. All the perfumes he had about him could not hinder the disgust of such a visit rising up into his nostrils. Callista's room was very well for a prison. It was on the ground floor of a house of many stories, close to the Officium of the Triumvirate. Though not any longer under their strict jurisdiction, she was allowed to remain where she had first been lodged. She was in one of the rooms belonging to an apparitor of that Officium, and as he had a wife, or at least a partner, to take care of her, she might consider herself very well off. However, the reader must recollect that we are in Africa, and in the month of July, and our young Greek was little used to heats, which made the whole city nothing less than one vast oven through the greater part of the 24 hours. In lofty, spacious apartments, the resource adopted is to exclude the external air, and to live as Greenlanders, with closed windows and doors. This was both impossible and would have been unsuccessful, if attempted in the small apartment of Callista. But fever of mind is even worse than the heat of the sky, and it is undeniable that her health and her strength and her appearance are affected by both the physical and the moral enemy. The beauty which was her brother's delight is waning away, and the shadows, if not the rudiments of a diviner loveliness, which is of expression, not of feature, which inspires not human passion, but diffuses chaste thoughts and aspirations, are taking its place. Aristo sees the change with no kind of satisfaction. The room has a bench, 2 or 3 stools, and a bed of rushes in one corner. A staple is firmly fixed in the wall, and an iron chain, light, however, and long, if the two ideas can be reconciled, reaches to her slender arm, and is joined to it by an iron ring. On Polemo's entering the room, his first exclamation was to complain of its closeness; but he had to do a work, so he began it without delay. Callista, on her part, started. She had no wish for his presence. She was reclining on her couch, and she sat up. She was not equal to a controversy, nor did she mean to have one, whatever might be the case with him. "Callista, my life and joy, dear Callista," said her brother, "I have brought the greatest man in Sicca to see you." Callista cast upon him an earnest look, which soon subsided into indifference. He had a rose of Cyrene in his hand, whose perfume he diffused about the small room. "It is Polemo," continued Aristo, "the friend of the great Plotinus, who knows all philosophies and all philosophers. He has come out of kindness to you." Callista acknowledged his presence. It was certainly, she said, a great kindness for any one to visit her, and there. Polemo replied by a compliment. He said it was Socrates visiting Aspasia. There had always been women above the standard of their sex, and they had ever held an intellectual converse with men of the mind. He saw one such before him. Callista felt it would be plunging her soul still deeper into shadows, when she sought realities, if she must take part in such an argument. She remained silent. "Your sister has not the fit upon her?" asked Polemo of Aristo, aside, neither liking her reception of him, nor knowing what to say. "Not at all, dear thing," answered Aristo. "She is all attention for you to begin." "Natives of Greece," at length said he, "natives of Greece should know each other. They deserve to know each other. There is a secret sympathy between them, like that mysterious influence which unites magnet to magnet, or like the echo which is a repercussion of the original voice. So, in like manner, Greeks are what none but they can be." And he smelt at his rose, and bowed. She smiled faintly when he mentioned Greece. "Yes," she said, "I am fonder of Greece than of Africa." "Each has its advantages," said Polemo. "There is a pleasure in imparting knowledge, in lighting flame from flame. It would be selfish did we not leave Greece to communicate what they have not here. But you," he added, "lady, neither can learn in Greece nor teach in Africa, while you are in this vestibule of Orcus. I understand, however, it is your own choice. Can that be possible?" "Well, I wish to get out, if I could, most learned Polemo," said Callista sadly. "May Polemo of Rhodes speak frankly to Callista of Proconnesus?" asked Polemo. "I would not speak to every one. If so, let me ask, what keeps you here?" "The magistrates of Sicca, and this iron chain," answered Callista. "I would I could be elsewhere. I would I were not what I am." "What could you wish to be more than you are?" answered Polemo. "More gifted, accomplished, beautiful than any daughter of Africa?" "Go to the point, Polemo," said Aristo, nervously, though respectfully. "She wants home thrusts." "I see my brother wants you to ask how far it depends on me that I am here," said Callista, wishing to hasten his movements. "It is because I will not burn incense upon the altar of Jupiter." "A most insufficient reason, lady," said Polemo. Callista was silent. "What does that action mean?" said Polemo. "It proposes to mean nothing else than that you are loyal to the Roman power. You are not of those Greeks, I presume, who dream of a national insurrection at this time? Then you are loyal to Rome. Did I believe a Leonidas could now arise, an Harmodius, a Miltiades, a Themistocles, a Pericles, an Epaminondas, I should be as ready to take the sword as another. But it is hopeless. Greece, then, makes no claim on you just now; nor will I believe, though you were to tell me so yourself, that you are leagued with any obscure fanatic sect who desire Rome's downfall. Consider what Rome is." And now he had got into the magnificent commonplace out of his last panegyrical oration, with which he had primed himself before he set out. "I am a Greek," he said. "I love Greece, but I love truth better. And I look at facts, I grasp them, and I confess to them. The wide earth, through untold centuries, has at length grown into the imperial dominion of one. It has converged and coalesced in all its various parts into one Rome. This which we see is the last, the perfect state of human society, the course of things, the force of natural powers, as is well understood by all great lawyers and philosophers, cannot go further. Unity has come at length, and unity is eternity. It will be for ever, because it is a whole. The principle of dissolution is eliminated. We have reached the apotelesma of the world. Greece, Egypt, Assyria, Libya, Etruria, Lydia, have all had their share in the result. Each of them in its own day has striven in vain to stop the course of fate, and has been hurried onward at its wheel as its victim or its instrument. And shall Judæa do what profound Egypt and subtle Greece have tried in vain, if even the freedom of thought, the liberal scepticism, nay, the revolutionary theories of Hellas have proved unequal to the task of splitting up the Roman power, if the pomp and luxury of the East have failed, shall the mysticism of Syria succeed? "Well, dear Callista, are you listening?" cried Aristo, not over confident of the fact, though Polemo looked round at him with astonishment. "10 centuries," he continued, 10 centuries have just been completed since Rome began her victorious career. For 10 centuries she has been fulfilling her high mission in the dispositions of destiny, and perfecting her maxims of policy and rules of government. For 10 centuries she has pursued one track with an ever-growing intensity of zeal, and an ever-widening extent of territory. What can she not do? Just one thing, and that one thing which she has not presumed to do, you are attempting. She has maintained her own religion, as was fitting, but she has never thrown contempt on the religion of others. This you are doing. Observe, Callista, Rome herself, in spite of her great power, has yielded to that necessity which is greater. She does not meddle with the religions of the peoples. She has opened no war against their diversities of rite. The conquering power found, especially in the East, innumerable traditions, customs, prejudices, principles, superstitions, matted together in one hopeless mass. She left them as they were. She recognized them. It would have been the worse for her if she had done otherwise. All she said to the peoples, all she dared say to them was, 'You bear with me, and I will bear with you.' Yet this you will not do. You Christians, who have no pretence to any territory, who are not even the smallest of the peoples, who are not even a people at all, you have the fanaticism to denounce all other rites but your own, nay, the religion of great Rome,
Who are you, upstarts and vagabonds of yesterday? Older religions than yours, more intellectual, more beautiful religions, which have had a position and a history and a political influence, have come to naught, and shall you prevail, you, a congeries, a hotch-potch of the leavings and scraps and broken meat of the great peoples of the East and West? Blush, blush, Grecian Callista! You, with a glorious nationality of your own, to go shares with some 100 peasants, slaves, thieves, beggars, hucksters, tinkers, cobblers, and fishermen. A lady of high character, of brilliant accomplishments, to be the associate of the outcasts of society." Polemo's speech, though cumbrous, did execution, at least the termination of it, upon minds constituted like the Grecian. Aristo jumped up, swore an oath, and looked round triumphantly at Callista, who felt its force also. After all, what did she know of Christians? At best, she was leaving the known for the unknown. She was sure to be embracing certain evil for contingent good. She said to herself, "No, I never can be a Christian." Then she said aloud, "My lord Polemo, I am not a Christian. I never said I was." "That is her absurdity," cried Aristo. "She is neither one thing nor the other. She won't say she's a Christian, and she won't sacrifice." "It is my misfortune," she said. "I know. I am losing both what I see and what I don't see. It is most inconsistent. Yet what can I do?" Polemo had said what he considered enough. He was one of those who sold his words. He had already been over generous, and was disposed to give away no more. After a time Callista said, "Polemo, do you believe in one God?" "Certainly," he answered. "I believe in one eternal, self‐existing something." "Well," she said, "I feel that God within my heart. I feel myself in His presence. He says to me, 'Do this, don't do that.' You may tell me that this dictate is a mere law of my nature, as is to joy or to grieve. I cannot understand this. No, it is the echo of a person speaking to me. Nothing shall persuade me that it does not ultimately proceed from a person external to me. It carries with it its proof of its divine origin. My nature feels towards it as towards a person. When I obey it, I feel a satisfaction; when I disobey, a soreness, just like that which I feel in pleasing or offending some revered friend. So you see, Polemo, I believe in what is more than a mere something. I believe in what is more real to me than sun, moon, stars, and the fair earth, and the voice of friends. You will say, 'Who is he? Has he ever told you anything about himself?' Alas, no! The more's the pity. But I will not give up what I have, because I have not more. An echo implies a voice, a speaker. That speaker I love, and I fear." Here she was exhausted and overcome too, poor Callista, with her own emotions. "Oh that I could find him!" she exclaimed passionately. "On the right hand and on the left I grope, but touch him not. Why dost thou fight against me? Why dost thou scare and perplex me, O first and only fair? I have thee not, and I need thee," she added. "I am no Christian, you see, or I should have found him, or at least I should say I had found him."
"It is hopeless," said Polemo to Aristo, in much disgust, and with some hauteur of manner. "She is too far gone. You should not have brought me to this place." Aristo groaned.
"Shall I," she continued, "worship any but him? Shall I say that he whom I see not, whom I seek, is our Jupiter, or Cæsar, or the goddess of Rome? They are none of them images of this inward guide of mine. I sacrifice to him alone."
The two men looked at each other in amazement, one of them in anger.
"It's like the demon of Socrates," said Aristo, timidly. "I will acknowledge Cæsar in every fitting way," she repeated, "but I will not make him my god." Presently she added, "Polemo, will not that invisible monitor have something to say to all of us, to you, at some future day?"
"Spare me, Callista!" cried Polemo, starting up with a violence unsuited to his station and profession. "Spare my ears, unhappy woman! Such words have never hitherto entered them. I did not come to be insulted. Poor, blind, hapless, perverse spirit, I separate myself from you forever. Desert, if you will, the majestic, bright, beneficent traditions of your forefathers, and live in this frightful superstition. Farewell." He did not seem better pleased with Aristo than with Callista, though Aristo helped him into his litter, walked by his side, and did what he could to propitiate him. CHAPTer 28. Chapter 29 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Conversion. If there is a state of mind utterly forlorn, it is that in which we left the poor prisoner after Polemo had departed. She was neither a Christian, nor was she not. She was in the midway region of inquiry, which as surely takes time to pass over, except there be some almost miraculous interference, as it takes time to walk from place to place. You see a person coming towards you, and you say impatiently, "Why don't you come faster? Why are you not here already?" Why? Because it takes time. To see that heathenism is false, to see that Christianity is true, are two acts, and involve two processes. They may indeed be united, and the truth may supplant the error, but they may not. Callista obeyed as far as truth was brought home to her. She saw the vanity of idols before she had faith in Him who came to destroy them. She could safely say, "I discard Jupiter." She could not say, "I am a Christian." Besides, what did she know of Christians? How did she know that they would admit her if she wished it? They were a secret society, with an election, an initiation, and oaths, not a mere philosophical school, or a profession of opinion open to any individual. If they were the good people that she fancied them to be, and if they were not, she would not think of them at all, they were not likely to accept of her. Still, though we may account for her conduct, its issue was not on that account the less painful. She had neither the promise of this world nor of the next, and was losing earth without gaining heaven. Our Lord is reported to have said, "Be ye good money changers." Poor Callista did not know how to turn herself to account. It had been so all through her short life. She had ardent affections, and keen sensibilities, and high aspirations, but she was not fortunate in the application of them. She had put herself into her brother's hands, and had let him direct her course. It could not be expected that he would be very different from the world. We are cautioned against rejoicing in our youth. Aristo rejoiced in his without restraint, and he made his sister rejoice in hers if enjoyment it was. He himself found in the pleasures he pointed out a banquet of fruits, she dust and ashes. And so she went on, not changing her life, from habit, from the captivity of nature, but weary, disappointed, fastidious, hungry, yet not knowing what she would have, yearning after something, she did not well know what. And as heretofore she had cast her lot with the world, yet had received no price for her adhesion, so now she had bid it farewell, yet had nothing to take in its place. As to her brother, after the visit of Polemo, he got more and more annoyed, angry rather than distressed, and angry with her. One more opportunity occurred of her release, and it was the last effort he made to move her. Cornelius, in spite of his pomposity, had acted the part of a real friend. He wrote from Carthage that he had happily succeeded in his application to government, and, difficult and unusual as was the grace, had obtained her release. He sent the formal documents for carrying it through the court, and gained the eager benediction of the excitable Aristo. He rushed with the parchments to the magistrates, who recognized them as sufficient, and got an order for admission to her room. "Joy, my dearest," he cried, "you are free. We will leave this loathsome country by the first vessel. I have seen the magistrates already." The colour came into her wan face. She clasped her hands together, and looked earnestly at Aristo. He proceeded to explain the process of liberation. She would not be called on to sacrifice, but must sign a writing to the effect that she had done so, and there would be an end of the whole matter. On the first statement she saw no difficulty in the proposal, and started up in animation. Presently her countenance fell. How could she say that she had done what it was treason to her inward guide to do? What was the difference between acknowledging a blasphemy by a signature or by incense? She smiled sorrowfully at him, shook her head, and lay down again upon her rushes. She had anticipated the Church's judgment on the case of the Libellatici. Aristo could not at first believe he heard aright, that she refused to be saved by what seemed to him a matter of legal form, and his anger grew so high as to eclipse and to shake his affection. "Lost girl!" he cried, "I abandon you to the Furies!" And he shook his clenched hand at her. He turned away, and said he would never see her again. And he kept his word. He never came again. He took refuge, with less restraint than was usual to him, in such pleasures as the city could supply, and strove to drive his sister from his mind by dissipation. He mixed in the games of the Campus Martius under the shadow of the mountain, took part with the revellers in the Forum, and ended the evening at the Thermæ. Sometimes the image of dear Callista, as once she looked, would rush into his mind with a force which would not be denied, and he would weep for a whole night. At length he determined to destroy himself, after the example of so many great men. He gave a sumptuous entertainment, expending his means upon it, and invited his friends to partake of it. It passed off with great gaiety. Nothing was wanting to make it equal to an occasion so special and singular. He disclosed to his guests his purpose, and they applauded. The last libations were made, the revellers departed, the lights were extinguished. Aristo disappeared that night. Sicca never saw him again. After some time it was found that he was at Carthage, and he had been provident enough to take with him some of his best working tools, and some specimens of his own and poor Callista's skill. Strange to say, Jucundus proved a truer friend to the poor girl than her brother. In spite of his selfishness and hatred of Christians, he was considerably affected as her case got more and more serious, and it became evident that only one answer could be returned to the magistrates from Carthage. He was quite easy about Agellius, who had, as he considered, successfully made off with himself, and he was reconciled to the thought of never seeing him again. Had it not been for this, one might have fancied that some lurking anxiety about the fate of his nephew might have kept alive the fidget which Callista's dismal situation gave him. For the philosopher tells us that pity always has something in it of self, but under the circumstances it would be rash judgment to have any such suspicion of his motives. He was not a cruel man. Even the hoary-headed Fabian, or Cyprian, or others whom he so roundly abused, would have found, when it came to the point, that his bluster was his worst weapon against them. At any rate, he had enough of the milk of human kindness to feel considerable distress about that idiotic Callista. Yet what could he do? He might as well stop the passage of the sun as the movements of mighty Rome, and a rescript would be coming to a certainty in due time from Carthage, and would just say one thing which would forthwith be passing into the region of fact. He had no one to consult, and to tell the truth, Callista's fate was more than acquiesced in by the public of Sicca. Her death seemed a solution of various perplexities and troubles into which the edict had brought them. It would be purchasing the praise of loyalty cheaply. Moreover, there were sets of men actually hostile to her and her brother. The companies of statuaries, lapidaries, and goldsmiths were jealous of foreign artists like them, who showed contempt for Africa, and who were acquainted, or rather intimate, with many of the higher classes, and even high personages in the place. Well, but could not some of those great people help her now? His mind glanced towards Calphurnius, whom he had heard of as in some way or other protecting her on the evening of the riot, and to him he determined to betake himself. Calphurnius and the soldiery were still in high dudgeon with the populace of Sicca, displeased with the magistrates, and full of sympathy for Callista. Jucundus opened his mind fully to the tribune, and persuaded him to take him to Septimius, his military superior; and in the presence of the latter many good words were uttered, both by Calphurnius and Jucundus. Jucundus gave it as his opinion that it was a very great mistake to strike at any but the leaders of the Christian sect. He quoted the story of King Tarquin and the poppies, and assured the great man that it was what he had always said and always prophesied, and that, depend upon it, it was a great mistake not to catch Cyprianus. "The strong arm of the law," he said, "should not, on the other hand, be put forth against such butterflies as this Callista, a girl who, he knew from her brother, had not yet seen 18 summers. What harm could such a poor helpless thing possibly do? She could not even defend herself, much less attack anybody else. No," he continued, "your proper policy with these absurd people is a smiling face and an open hand. Recollect the fable of the sun and the wind. Which made the traveller lay aside his cloak? Do you fall in with some sour-visaged, stiff-backed worshipper of the Furies. Fill his cup for him, crown his head with flowers, bring in the flute women. Observe him, he relaxes, a smile spreads on his countenance, he laughs at a jest. Captus est, habet. He pours a libation. Great Jove has conquered. He is loyal to Rome. What can you desire more? But beat him, kick him, starve him, turn him out of doors, and you have a natural enemy to do you a mischief whenever he can." Calphurnius took his own line, and a simple one. "If it was some vile slave or scoundrel African," he said, "no harm would have been done. But, by Jupiter Tonans, it's a Greek girl who sings like a muse, dances like a Grace, and spouts verses like Minerva. 'Twould be sacrilege to touch a hair of her head. And we, forsooth, are to let these cowardly dogs of magistrates entrap Fortunianus at Carthage into this solecism." Septimius said nothing, as became a man in office, but he came to an understanding with his visitors. It was plain that the Duumvirs of Sicca had no legal custody of Callista. In a criminal matter she might seem to fall under the jurisdiction of the military, and Calphurnius gained leave to claim his right at the proper moment. The rest of his plan the tribune kept to himself, nor did Septimius wish to know it. He intended to march a guard into the prison shortly before Callista was brought out for execution, and then to make it believed that she had died under the horrors of the Barathrum. The corpse of another woman could without difficulty be found to be her representative, and she herself would be carried off to the camp. Meanwhile, to return to the prisoner herself, what was the consolation, what the occupation of Callista in this waiting time, ere the proconsul had sent his answer? Strange to say, and we suppose from a sinful waywardness in her, she had up to this moment neglected to avail herself of a treasure, which by a rare favour had been put into her possession. A small parchment, carefully written, elaborately adorned, lay in her bosom, which might already have been the remedy of many a perplexity, many a woe. It is difficult to say under what feelings she had been reluctant to open the Holy Gospel, which Cæcilius had entrusted to her care; whether she was so low and despondent that she could not make the effort, or whether she feared to convince herself further, or whether she professed to be waiting for some calmer time, as if that were possible, or whether her unwillingness was that which makes sick people so averse to eating, or to remedies which they know would be useful to them, cannot well be determined. But there are many of us who may be able, from parallel instances of infirmity, to enter into that state of mind which led her at least to procrastinate what she might do any minute. However, now left absolutely to herself, Aristo gone, and the answer of the government to the magistracy not having yet come, she recurred to the parchment, and to the bishop's words, which ran, "Here you will see who it is we love," or language to that effect. It was tightly lodged under her girdle, and so had escaped in the confusion of that terrible evening. She opened it at length, and read. It was the writing of a provincial Greek, elegant, however, and marked with that simplicity which was to her taste the elementary idea of a classic author. It was addressed to one Theophilus, and professed to be a carefully digested and verified account of events which had been already attempted by others. She read a few paragraphs, and became interested, and in no long time she was absorbed in the volume. When she had once taken it up, she did not lay it down. Even at other times she would have prized it, but now, when she was so desolate and lonely, it was simply a gift from an unseen world. It opened a view of a new state and community of beings, which only seemed too beautiful to be possible; but not into a new state of things alone, but into the presence of one who was simply distinct, and removed from anything that she had, in her most imaginative moments, ever depicted to her mind as ideal perfection. Here was that to which her intellect tended, though that intellect could not frame it. It could approve and acknowledge, when set before it, what it could not originate. Here was he who spoke to her in her conscience, whose voice she heard, whose person she was seeking for. Here was he who kindled a warmth on the cheek of both Chione and Agellius. That image sank deep into her. She felt it to be a reality. She said to herself, "This is no poet's dream. It is the delineation of a real individual. There is too much truth, and nature, and life, and exactness about it to be anything else." Yet she shrank from it. It made her feel her own difference from it, and a feeling of humiliation came upon her mind, such as she never had had before. She began to despise herself more thoroughly day by day. Yet she recollected various passages in the history which reassured her amid her self-debasement, especially that of his tenderness and love for the poor girl at the feast who would anoint his feet, and the full tears stood in her eyes, and she fancied she was that sinful child, and that he did not repel her. Oh, what a new world of thought she had entered! It occupied her mind from its very novelty. Everything looked dull and dim by the side of it. Her brother had ever been dinning into her ears that maxim of the heathen, "Enjoy the present, trust nothing to the future." She indeed could not enjoy the present with that relish which he wished, and she had not any trust in the future either. But this volume spoke a different doctrine. There she learned the very opposite to what Aristo taught, viz., that the present must be sacrificed for the future, that what is seen must give way to what is believed. Nay, more, she drank in the teaching, which at first seemed so paradoxical, that even present happiness and present greatness lie in relinquishing what at first sight seems to promise them; that the way to true pleasure is, not through self‐indulgence, but through mortification; that the way to power is weakness, the way to success failure, the way to wisdom foolishness, the way to glory dishonour. She saw that there was a higher beauty than that which the order and harmony of the natural world revealed, and a deeper peace and calm than that which the exercise, whether of the intellect or of the purest human affection, can supply. She now began to understand that strange unearthly composure which had struck her in Chione, Agellius, and Cæcilius. She understood that they were detached from the world, not because they had not the possession, nor the natural love of its gifts, but because they possessed a higher blessing already, which they loved above everything else. Thus by degrees Callista came to walk by a new philosophy, and had ideas and principles, and a sense of relations and aims, and a susceptibility of arguments, to which before she was an utter stranger. Life and death, action and suffering, fortunes and abilities, all had now a new meaning and application. As the skies speak differently to the philosopher and the peasant, as a book of poems to the imaginative and to the cold and narrow intellect, so now she saw her being, her history, her present condition, her future, in a new light, which no one else could share with her; but the ruling sovereign thought of the whole was He, who exemplified all this wonderful philosophy in Himself. End of chapter 29. Chapter 30 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Torres Vedras. There were those, however, whom Callista could understand, and who could understand her. There were those who, while Aristo, Cornelius, Jucundus, and Polemo were moving in her behalf, were interesting themselves also in her, and in a more effectual way. Agellius had joined Cæcilius, and if in no other way, by his mouth came to the latter and his companions the news of her imprisonment. On the morning that Agellius had been so strangely let out of confinement by his brother, and found himself seated at the street door, with his tunic on his arm, and his boots on the ground before him, his first business was to recollect where he was, and to dispose of those articles of dress according to their respective uses. What should he do with himself was of course his second thought. He could not stay there long without encountering the early risers of Sicca, the gates being already open. To attempt to find out where Callista was, and then to see her or rescue her, would have ended at once in his own capture. To go to his own farm would have been nearly as dangerous, and would have had less meaning. Cæcilius, too, had said that they were not long to be separated, and had given him directions for finding him. Immediately then he made his way to one of the eastern gates, which led to Tiber Succumber. There was indeed no time to be lost, as he soon had indications. He met several men who knew him by sight, and one of the apparitors of the Duumviri, who happily did not. An apostate Christian, whose zeal for the government was notorious, passed him and looked back after him. However, he would soon be out of pursuit, if he had the start of them, until the sun got round the mountains he was seeking. He walked on through a series of rocky and barren hills, till he got some way past the second milestone. Before he had reached the third, he had entered a defile in the mountains. Perpendicular rocks rose on each side of him, and the level road, reaching from rock to rock, was not above 30 feet across. He felt that if he was pursued here, there was no escape. The third milestone passed, he came to the country road. He pursued it, counting out his 1,000 steps, as Cæcilius had instructed him. By this time it had left the stony bottom, and was rising up the side of the precipice. Brushwood and dwarf pines covered it, mingled with a few olives and caroubas. He said out his 7 paternosters as he walked, and then looked around. He had just passed a goatherd, and they looked hard at each other. Agellius wished him good morning. "You are wishing a kid for Bacchus, sir," said the man to him as he was running his eye over the goats. On Agellius answering in the negative, he said in a clownish way, "He who does not sacrifice to Bacchus does not sacrifice goats." Agellius, bearing in mind Cæcilius's directions, saw of course there was something in the words which did not meet the ear, and answered carelessly, "He who does not sacrifice to Bacchus." "True," said the man, "but perhaps you prefer a lamb for a sacrifice." Agellius replied, "If it is the right one, but the one I mean was slain long since." The man, without any change of manner, went on to say that there was an acquaintance of his not far up the rock, who could perhaps satisfy him on the point. He said, "Follow those wild olives, though the path seems broken, and you will come to him at the 19th." Agellius set out, and never was path so untrue to its own threats. It seemed ending in abrupt cliffs every turn, but never fulfilled the anticipation, that is, while he kept to the olive trees. After ascending what was rather a flight of marble steps, washed and polished by the winter torrents, than a series of crags, he fulfilled the number of trees, and looked round at the man sitting under it. Oh, the joy and surprise! It was his old servant Aspar. "You are safe then, Aspar," he said, "and I find you here. Oh, what a tender providence!" "I have taken my stand here, master," returned Aspar, "day after day since I got here, in hopes of seeing you. I could not get back to you from Jucundus's that dreadful morning, and so I made my way here. Your uncle sent for you in my presence, but at the time I did not know what it meant. I was able to escape." "And now for Cæcilius," said Agellius. Behind the olive tree a torrent's bed descended, the descent being so easy and yet so natural, that art had evidently interfered with nature, yet concealed its interference. After tracing it some yards, they came to a chasm on the opposite side, and passing through it, Agellius soon found himself, to his surprise, on a bleak open hill, to which the huge mountain formed merely a sort of façade. Its surface was half rock, half moor, and it was surrounded by precipices. It was such a place as some hermit of the Middle Ages might have chosen for his solitude. The two walked briskly across it, and at length came to a low, broad, yawning opening, branching out into several passages, which, if pursued, would have been found to end in nothing. Aspar, however, made straight for what appeared a dead wall of rock, in which, on his making a signal, a door skilfully hidden was opened from within, and was shut behind them by the porter. They now stood in a gallery running into the mountain. It was very long, and a stream of cold air came along it. Aspar told him that at the extremity of it they should find Cæcilius. Agellius was indeed in the vestibule of a remarkable specimen of those caves which had been used for religious purposes, first by the aborigines of the country, then by the Phoenician colonists, and in the centuries which had just passed, for the concealment of the Christians. The passage along which they were proceeding might itself be fitly called a cave, but still it was only one of several natural subterraneans, of different shapes and opening into each other. Some of them lay along the face of a ravine, from which they received light and air, and here in one place there were indications of a fortified front. They were perfectly dry, though the water had at some remote period filtered through the roof, and had formed pendants and pillars of semi-transparent stalactite of great beauty. It was another and singular advantage that a particular spot in one of the caverns, which bordered on the ravine, was the focus of an immense ear or whispering gallery, such that whatever took place in the public road in which the ravine terminated could be distinctly heard there, and thus they were always kept on guard against the attack of an enemy, if expected. Had either Agellius or Aspar been curious about such a matter, the latter might have pointed out the place where a Punic altar once had been discovered, with a sort of tumulus of bones of mice near at hand, that animal coming into the list of victims in the Phoenician worship. But the two Christians were engaged, as they first halted and then walked along the corridor, in other thoughts than in asking and answering questions about the history of the place of refuge in which they found themselves. We have already remarked on the central position of Sicca for the purpose of missionary work and of retreat in persecution. Such a dwelling in the rocks did but increase its advantageousness, and in consequence at this moment many Christians had availed themselves of it. It is an English proverb that 3 removes are as bad as a fire, and so great were the perils and the hardships of flight in those times, that it was a question, in a merely earthly point of view, whether the risk of being apprehended at home was not a far less evil than the evils which were certain upon leaving it. There was nothing, then, ungenerous in the ecclesiastical rule that they alone should flee in persecution who were marked out for death if they stayed. The laity, private families, and the priests on whose ministrations they depended, remained. Bishops, deacons, and what may be called the staff of the episcopate, notaries, messengers, seminarists, and ascetics, would disappear from the scene of persecution. Agellius learned from his slave that the cave had been known to him from the time he was a boy, and that it was one of the secrets which all who shared it religiously observed. Holy men, it seemed, had had intimations of the present trial for several years past, and it was the full persuasion of the heads of the Church that though it might blow over for a short time, it would recur at intervals for many years, ending in a visitation so heavy and long that the times of Antichrist would seem to have arrived. However, the impression upon their minds was that then would come a millennium, or in some sort a reign of the saints upon the earth. That, however, was a date which even Agellius himself, young as he was, would not be likely to reach. Indeed, who could expect to escape, who might not hope to gain a martyr's death in the interval, in the series of assaults between which Christianity had to run the gauntlet? Aspar said, moreover, that some martyrs lay in the chapels within, and that various confessors had ended their days there. At the present time there were representatives there collected of a large portion of the churches of the proconsulate. A post, so to call it, went between them and Carthage every week, and his friend and father, the bishop of that city, was especially busy in correspondence. Moreover, Agellius learned from him that they had many partisans, well-wishers, and sympathizers about the country, whom no one suspected. The families of parents who had conformed to the established worship, nay, sometimes the apostates themselves, and that this was the case in Sicca as well as elsewhere. For himself, old and ignorant as he was, the persecution had proved to him an education. He had been brought near great men, and some who, he was confident, would be martyrs in the event. He had learned a great deal about his religion, which he did not know before, and had drunk in the spirit of Christianity with a fullness which he trusted would not turn to his ultimate condemnation. He now, too, had a consciousness of the size and populousness of the Church, of her diffusion, of the promises made to her, of the essential necessity of what seemed to be misfortune, of the episcopal regimen, and of the power and solidity of the see of Peter afar off in Rome, all which knowledge had made him quite another being. We have put all this into finer language than the good old man used himself, and we have grouped it more exactly, but this is what his words would come to when explained. Coming down to sublunary matters, Aspar said the cave was well provisioned. They had bread, oil, figs, dried grapes, and wine. They had vessels and vestments for the holy sacrifice. Their serious want was a dearth of water at that season. but they relied on divine providence to give them, by miracle, if in no other way, a supply. The place was piercingly cold, too, in the winter. By this time they had gained the end of the long gallery, and passed through a second apartment, when suddenly the sounds of the ecclesiastical chant burst on the ear of Agellius. How strange, how transporting to him! He was almost for the first time coming home to his Father's house, though he had been a Christian from a child, and never, as he trusted, to leave it now that it was found. He did not know how to behave himself, nor indeed where to go. Aspar conducted him into the seats set apart for the faithful. He knelt down and burst into tears. It was approaching the third hour, the hour at which the Paraclete originally descended upon the Apostles, and which, when times of persecution were past, was appointed in the West for the solemn Mass of the day. In that early age, indeed, the time of the solemnity was generally midnight, in order to elude observation; but even then such an hour was considered of but temporary arrangement. Pope Telesphorus is said to have prescribed the hour, afterwards in use, as early even as the second century, and in a place of such quiet and security as the cavern in which we just now find ourselves, there was no reason why it should not be selected. At the lower end of the chapel was a rail extending across it, and open in the middle, where its two portions turned up at right angles on each side towards the altar. The enclosure thus made was the place proper for the faithful, into which Agellius had been introduced, and about 50 persons were collected about him. Where the two side rails which ran up the chapel ceased, there was a broad step, and upon it 2 pulpits, one on each side. Then came a second elevation, carrying the eye on to the extremity of the upper end. In the middle of the wall at that upper end is a recess, occupied by a tomb. On the front of it is written the name of some glorious champion of the faith who lies there. It is one of the first bishops of Sicca, and the inscription attests that he slept in the Lord under the Emperor Antoninus. Over the sacred relics is a slab, and on the slab the divine mysteries are now to be celebrated. At the back is a painting on the wall, very similar to that in Agellius's cottage. The ever blessed Immaculate Mother of God is exercising her office as the advocate of sinners, standing by the sacrifice as she stood at the cross itself, and offering up and applying its infinite merits and incommunicable virtue in union with priest and people. So instinctive in the Christian mind is the principle of decoration, as it may be called, that, even in times of suffering and places of banishment, we see it brought into exercise. Not only is the arch which overspans the altar ornamented with an arabesque pattern, but the roof or vault is coloured with paintings. Our Lord is in the centre, with 2 figures of Moses on each side, on the right unloosing his sandals, on the left striking the rock. Between the centre figure and the altar may be seen the raising of Lazarus; in the opposite partition the healing of the paralytic. At the 4 angles are men and women alternately in the attitude of prayer. At this time the altar stone was covered with a rich crimson silk, with figures of St. Peter and St. Paul worked in gold upon it, the gift of a pious lady of Carthage. Beyond the altar, but not touching it, was a cross, and on one side of the altar a sort of basin or piscina cut in the rock, with a linen cloth hanging up against it. There were no candles upon the altar itself, but wax lights, fixed into silver stands, were placed at intervals along the edge of the presbytery or elevation. The Mass was in behalf of the confessors for the faith then in prison in Carthage, and the sacred ministers, some half hour after Agellius's entrance, made their appearance. Their vestments already varied somewhat from the ordinary garments of the day, and bespoke antiquity; and though not so simply sui generis as they are now, they were so far special that they were never used on any other occasion, but were reserved for the sacred service. The neck was bare, the amice being as yet unknown. Instead of the stole was what was called the orarium, a sort of handkerchief resting on the shoulders and falling down on each side. The alb had been an inner garment or camisium, which in civil use was retained at night when the other garments were thrown off, and as at the present day it was confined around the waist by a zone or girdle. The maniple was a napkin, supplying the place of a handkerchief, and the chasuble was an ample paenula, such as was worn by the judges, a cloak enveloping the whole person round, when spread out, with an opening in the centre, through which the head might pass. The deacon's dalmatic was much longer than it is now, and the subdeacon's tunicle resembled the alb. All the vestments were of the purest white. The Mass began by the bishop giving his blessing, and then the lector, a man of venerable age, taking the roll called lectionarium, and proceeding to a pulpit, read the prophets to the people, much in the way observed among ourselves still on Holy Saturday and the Vigil of Pentecost. These being finished, the people chanted the first verse of the Gloria Patri, after which the clergy alternated with the people the Kyrie, pretty much as the custom is now. Here a fresh roll was brought to the lector, then or afterwards called Apostolus, from which he read one of the canonical epistles. A psalm followed, which was sung by the people, and after this the lector received the Evangeliarium, and read a portion of the Gospel, at which lights were lighted, and the people stood. When he had finished, the lector opened the roll wide, and turning round presented it to bishop, clergy, and people to kiss. The deacon then cried out, Ite in pace catechumeni, depart in peace, catechumens. And then the kiss of peace was passed round, and the people began to sing some psalms or hymns. While they were so engaged, the deacon received from the acolyte the sindon or corporal, which was of the length of the altar, and perhaps of greater breadth, and spread it upon the sacred table. Next was placed on the sindon the oblata, that is, the small loaves, according to the number of communicants, with the paten, which was large, and a gold chalice duly prepared, and then the sindon or corporal was tucked back over them to cover them as a pall. The celebrant then advanced. He stood at the further side of the altar, where the candles are now, with his face to the people, and then began the holy sacrifice. First he incensed the oblata, that is, the loaves and chalice, as an acknowledgment of God's sovereign dominion, and as a token of uplifted prayer to him. Then the roll of prayers was brought him, while the deacon began what is sometimes called the bidding prayer, being a catalogue of the various subjects for which intercession is to be made, after the manner of the Oremus Dilectissimi, now used on Good Friday. This catalogue included all conditions of men, the conversion of the world, the exaltation of Holy Church, the maintenance of the Roman Empire, the due ripening and gathering of the fruits of the earth, and other spiritual and temporal blessings, subjects very much the same as those which are now called the Pope's intentions. The prayers ended with a special reference to those present, that they might persevere in the Lord even to the end, and then the priest began the Sursum Corda, and said the Sanctus. The canon or Actio seems to have run in all but a few words, as it does now, and the solemn words of consecration were said secretly. Great stress was laid on the Lord's Prayer, which in one sense terminated the function. It was said aloud by the people, and when they said, "Forgive us our trespasses," they beat their breasts. It is not wonderful that Agellius, assisting for almost the first time at this wonderful solemnity, should have noted everything as it occurred, and we must be considered as giving our account of it from his mouth. It needs not to enlarge on the joy of the meeting which followed between Cæcilius and his young penitent. "Oh, my father," he said, "I have come to thee, never to leave thee, to be thy dutiful servant, and to be trained by thee after the pattern of Him who made thee what thou art. Wonderful things have happened. Callista is in prison on the charge of Christianity. I was in a sort of prison myself, or what was worse for my soul, and Juba, my brother, in the strangest of ways, has this morning let me out. Shall she not be saved, my father, in God's own way, as well as I? At least, we can all pray for her, but surely we can do more. So precious a soul must not be left to herself and the world. If she has the trials, she may claim the blessings of a Christian. Is she to go back to heathenism? Is she, alas, to suffer without baptism? Shall we not hazard death to bestow on her that grace?" End of chapter 30. Chapter 31 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Baptism. We have already had occasion to mention that there were many secret well-wishers, or at least protectors of Christians. As in the world at large, so also in Sicca. There were many persons who had received benefits from their charity, and had experience of the scandalous falsehood of the charges now circulated against them. Others would feel a generosity towards a cruelly persecuted body. Others, utterly dead to the subject of religion, or rather believing all religions to be impostures, would not allow it to be assumed that only one was worthy of bad treatment. Others liked what they heard of the religion itself, and thought there was truth in it, though it had no claim to a monopoly of truth. Others felt it to be true, but shrank from the consequences of openly embracing it. Others, who had apostatized through fear of the executioner, intended to come back to it at the last. It must be added that in the African Church, confessors in prison had, or were considered to have, the remarkable privilege of gaining the public forgiveness of the Church for those who had lapsed. It was an object, then, for all those who, being in that miserable case, wished some day to be restored, to gain their promise of assistance or their goodwill. To these reasons was added, in Callista's case, the interest which naturally attached to a woman young and defenceless. The burning sun of Africa is at the height of its power. The population is prostrated by heat, by scarcity, by pestilence, and by the decimation which their riot brought upon them. They care neither for Christianity nor for anything else just now. They lie in the porticos, in the caverns under the city, in the baths. They are more alive at night. The apparitor in whose dwelling Callista was lodged, who was himself once a Christian, lies in the shade of the great doorway into which his rooms open, asleep or stupefied. 2 men make their appearance about 2 hours before sunset, and demand admittance to Callista. The jailer asks if they are not the 2 Greeks, her brother and the rhetorician, who had visited her before. The junior of the strangers drops a purse heavy with coin into his lap, and passes on with his companion. When the mind is intent on great subjects or aims, heat and cold, hunger and thirst, lose their power of enfeebling it. Thus perhaps we must account for the energy now displayed, both by the 2 ecclesiastics and by Callista herself. She too thought it was the unwelcome philosopher come again. She gave a start and a cry of delight when she saw it was Cæcilius. "My father," she said, "I want to be a Christian, if I may. He came to save the lost sheep. I have learnt such things from this book. Let me give it you while I can. I am not long for this world. Give me him who spoke so kindly to that woman. Take from me my load of sin, and then I will gladly go." She knelt at his feet, and gave the roll of parchment into his hand. "Rise and sit," he answered. "Let us think calmly over the matter." "I am ready," she insisted. "Deny me not my wish, when time is so urgent, if I may have it." "Sit down calmly," he said again. "I am not refusing you, but I wish to know about you." He could hardly keep from tears of pain or of joy, or of both, when he saw the great change which trial had wrought in her. What touched him most was the utter disappearance of that majesty of mien which once was hers, a gift so beautiful, so unsuitable to fallen man. There was instead of it a frank humility, a simplicity without concealment, an unresisting meekness, which seemed as if it would enable her, if trampled on, to smile and to kiss the feet that insulted her. She had lost every vestige of what the world worships under the titles of proper pride and self-respect. Callista was now living, not in the thought of herself, but of another. "God has been very good to you," he continued, "but in the volume you have returned to me, he bids us reckon the charges. Can you drink of his chalice? Recollect what is before you." She still continued kneeling, with a touching earnestness of face and demeanour, and with her hands crossed upon her breast. "I have reckoned," she replied, "heaven and hell. I prefer heaven." "You are on earth," said Cæcilius, "not in heaven or hell. You must bear the pangs of earth before you drink the blessedness of heaven." "He has given me the firm purpose," she said, "to gain heaven, to escape hell, and He will give me too the power." "Ah, Callista," he answered, in a voice broken with distress, "you know not what you will have to bear, if you join yourself to him." "He has done great things for me already. I am wonderfully changed. I am not what I was. He will do more still." "Alas, my child," said Cæcilius, "that feeble frame, how will it bear the strong iron, or the keen flame, or the ruthless beast? My child, what do I feel, who am free, thus handing you over to be the sport of the evil one?" "Father, I have chosen him," she answered, "not hastily, but on deliberation. I believe him most absolutely. Keep me not from him. Give him to me, if I may ask it. Give me my love." Presently she added, "I have never forgotten those words of yours since you used them. Amor meus crucifixus est." She began again, "I will be a Christian. Give me my place among them. Give me my place at the feet of Jesus, Son of Mary, my God. I wish to love him. I think I can love him. Make me his." "He has loved you from eternity," said Cæcilius, "and therefore you are now beginning to love him." She covered her eyes with her hands, and remained in profound meditation. "I am very ignorant, very sinful," she said at length; "but one thing I know, that there is but one to love in the whole world, and I wish to love him. I surrender myself to him, if he will take me, and he shall teach me about himself." The angry multitude, their fierce voices, the brutal executioner, the prison, the torture, the slow, painful death. He was speaking, not to her, but to himself. She was calm, in spite of her fervour, but he could not contain himself. His heart melted within him. He felt like Abraham lifting up his hand to slay his child. "Time passes," she said. "What may happen? You may be discovered. But perhaps," she added, suddenly changing her tone, "it is a matter of long initiation. Woe is me!" "We must gird ourselves to the work, Victor," he said to his deacon, who was with him. Cæcilius fell back and sat down, and Victor came forward. He formally instructed her, so far as the circumstances allowed, not for baptism only, but for confirmation and Holy Eucharist, for Cæcilius determined to give her all three sacraments at once. It was a sight for angels to look down upon, and they did, when the poor child, rich in this world's gifts, but poor in those of eternity, knelt down to receive that sacred stream upon her brow, which fell upon her with almost sensible sweetness, and suddenly produced a serenity different in kind from anything she had ever before even had the power of conceiving. The bishop gave her confirmation, and then the Holy Eucharist. It was her first and last communion. In a few days she renewed it, or rather completed it, under the very face and form of him whom she now believed without seeing. "Farewell, my dearest of children," said Cæcilius, "till the hour when we both meet before the throne of God. A few sharp pangs which you can count and measure, and all will be well. You will be carried through joyously, and, like a conqueror, I know it. You could face the prospect before you were a Christian, and you will be equal to the actual trial, now that you are." "Never fear me, father," she said in a clear, low voice. The bishop and his deacon left the prison. The sun had all but set when Cæcilius and Victor passed the city gate, and it was more than twilight as they crossed the wild hills leading to the precipitous pass. Evil men were not their only peril in this work of charity. They were also in danger from wild beasts in these lone wastes, and, the heathen would have added, from bad spirits. Bad spirits Cæcilius recognized too, but he would not have granted that they were perilous. The two went forward, saying prayers lowly, and singing psalms, when a sudden cry was heard, and a strong tall form rushed past them. It might be some robber of the wild, or dangerous outcast, or savage fanatic, who knew and hated their religion. However, when they stopped and looked, he had come, and he was gone. But he came again, and more slowly, and from his remarkable shape Cæcilius saw that it was the brother of Agellius. He said, "Juba." Juba started back and stood at a distance. Cæcilius held out his hand and called him on, again mentioning his name. The poor fellow came nearer. Cæcilius's day's work was not at an end. Since we last heard of him, Juba had dwelt in the mountainous tract over which the two Christians were now passing, roaming to and fro, or beating himself in idle fury against the adamantine rocks, and fighting with the stern necessity of the elements. How he was sustained can hardly be guessed, unless the impulse which led him on the first accession of his fearful malady to fly upon the beasts of the desert served him here also. Roots, too, and fruits were scattered over the wild, and still more so in the ravines, wherever any quantity of soil had been accumulated. Alas, had the daylight lasted, in him too, as well as in Callista, Cæcilius would have found changes, but of a very different nature. Yet even in him he would have seen a change for the better, for that old awful expression of pride and defiance was gone. What was the use of parading a self-will which every moment of his life belied? His actions, his words, his hands, his lips, his feet, his place of abode, his daily course, were in the dominion of another, who inexorably ruled him. It was not the gentle influence which draws and persuades. It was not the power which can be propitiated by prayer. It was a tyranny which acted without reaction, energetic as mind and impenetrable as matter. "Juba," said Cæcilius a third time. The maniac came nearer, and then again suddenly retreated. He stood at a short distance from Cæcilius, as if afraid to come on, and cried out, tossing his hands wildly, "Away, black hypocrite! Come not near me! Away, hound of a priest! Cross not my path, lest I tear you to shreds!" Such visitations were no novelties to Cæcilius. He raised his hand and made the sign of the cross. Then he said, "Come." Juba advanced, shrieked, and used some terrible words, and rushed upon Cæcilius as if he would treat him as he had treated the savage wolf. "Come!" he cried, "yes, I come!" And Victor ran up, fearing his teeth would be in Cæcilius's throat if he delayed longer. The latter stood his ground, quailing neither in eye nor in limb. He made the sign of the cross a second time, and in spite of a manifest antagonism within him, the stricken youth, with horrid cries, came dancing after him. Thus they proceeded, with some signs of insurrection from time to time on Juba's part, but with a successful reduction of it as often on the part of Cæcilius, till they got to the ascent by the olive trees, where careful walking was necessary. Then Cæcilius turned round and beckoned him. He came. He said, "Kneel down." He knelt down. Cæcilius put his hand on his head, saying to him, "Follow me close, and without any disturbance." The three pursued their journey, and all arrived safe at the cavern. There Cæcilius gave Juba in charge to Romanus, who had been entrusted with the energumens at Carthage. End of chapter 31. Chapter 32 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Imperial Rescript. Had the imperial edict been acted on by the magistrates of Sicca without a reference to Carthage, It is not easy to suppose that Callista would have persevered in her refusal to commit the act of idolatry required of her. But, to speak of second causes, the hesitation of her judges was her salvation. Once baptized, there was no reason she should desire any further delay of her conflict. Come it must, and come it did. While Cæcilius was placing her beyond danger, the rescript of the proconsul had been received at the office of the Duumvirs. The absence of the proconsul from Carthage had been the cause of the delay, and then some investigation was needed to understand the relation of Callista's seizure to the riot on the one hand, and to the strong act of the military on the other in quelling it. It was thought that something or other might come to light to account for the anomalous and unaccountable position which she had taken up. The imperial government considered it had now a clear view of her case, and its orders were distinct and peremptory. Christianity was to cease to be. It was a subtle foe, sapping the vitals of the state. Rome must perish, or this illegal association. Such evasions as Callista had used were but instances of its craft. Its treason lay, not in its being Christianity, but in its not sacrificing to the gods of Rome. Callista was but throwing dust in their eyes. There had been no blow struck against the treason in inland Africa. Women had often been the most dangerous of conspirators. As she was a stranger, there was more probability of her connection with secret societies, and also less inconvenience in her execution. Whatever happened, she was to be got rid of; but first her resolution was to be broken, for the sake of the example. First, let her be brought before the tribunal and threatened; then thrust into the Tullianum; then put upon the rack and returned to prison; then scorched over a slow fire; last of all, beheaded, and left for beasts of prey. She would sacrifice ere the last stage was reached. When she had given way, let her be given up to the gladiators. The message ended by saying that the proconsular procurator, who came by the same carriages, would preside at the process. O wisdom of the world, and strength of the world, what are you when matched beside the foolishness and the weakness of the Christian? You are great in resources, manifold in methods, hopeful in prospects; but one thing you have not, and that is peace. You are always tumultuous, restless, apprehensive. You have nothing you can rely upon. You have no rock under your feet. But the humblest, feeblest Christian has that which is impossible to you. Callista had once felt the misery of maladies akin to yours. She had passed through doubt, anxiety, perplexity, despondency, passion; but now she was in peace. Now she feared the torture or the flame as little as the breeze which arose at nightfall, or the busy chatter of the grasshoppers at the noonday. Nay, rather, she did not think of torture and death at all, but was possessed by a peace which bore her up, as if bodily, on its mighty wings. For hours she remained on her knees after Cæcilius left her; then she lay down on her rushes and slept her last sleep. She slept sound, she dreamed. She thought she was no longer in Africa, but in her own Greece, more sunny and bright than before; but the inhabitants were gone, its majestic mountains, its rich plains, its expanse of waters, all silent, no one to converse with, no one to sympathize with. And as she wandered on and wondered, suddenly its face changed, and its colours were illuminated tenfold by a heavenly glory, and each hue upon the scene was of a beauty she had never known, and seemed strangely to affect all her senses at once, being fragrance and music as well as light. And there came out of the grottos and glens and woods, and out of the seas, myriads of bright images, whose forms she could not discern, and these came all around her, and became a sort of scene or landscape, which she could not have described in words, as if it were a world of spirits, not of matter. and as she gazed, she thought she saw before her a well-known face, only glorified. She who had been a slave now was arrayed more brilliantly than an Oriental queen, and she looked at Callista with a smile so sweet that Callista felt she could but dance to it. And as she looked more earnestly, doubting whether she should begin or not, the face changed, and now was more marvellous still. It had an innocence in its look, and also a tenderness, which bespoke both maid and mother, and so transported Callista that she must needs advance towards her out of love and reverence. And the lady seemed to make signs of encouragement, so she began a solemn measure, unlike all dances of earth, with hands and feet, serenely moving on towards what she heard some of them call a great action and a glorious consummation, though she did not know what they meant. At length she was fain to sing as well as dance, and her words were, "In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost," on which another said, "A good beginning of the sacrifice." And when she had come close to this gracious figure, there was a fresh change. The face, the features were the same, but the light of divinity now seemed to beam through them, and the hair parted and hung down long on each side of the forehead, and there was a crown of another fashion than the ladies round about it, made of what looked like thorns, and the palms of the hands were spread out as if towards her, and there were marks of wounds in them, and the vestment had fallen, and there was a deep opening in the side, and as she stood entranced before him, and motionless, she felt a consciousness that her own palms were pierced like his, and her feet also, and she looked round and saw the likeness of his face and of his wounds upon all that company. And now they were suddenly moving on, and bearing something or someone heavenwards, and they too began to sing, and their words seemed to be, "Rejoice with me, for I have found my sheep," ever repeated. They went up through an avenue or long grotto, with torches of diamonds and amethysts and sapphires, which lit up its spars and made them sparkle, and she tried to look, but could not discover what they were carrying, till she heard a very piercing cry, which awoke her. End of chapter 32. Chapter 33 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. A good confession. The cry came from the keeper's wife, whom we have described as kindly disposed to her. She was a Libo-Phoenician, and spoke a broken Latin, but the language of sympathy is universal, in spite of Babel.
"Callista," she exclaimed, "girl, they've sent for you. You are to die. Oh, frightful! Worse than a runaway slave. The torture! Give in! What's the harm? You're so young. Those terrible men with the pincers and hot bars."
Callista sat up, and passed from her vision to her prison. She smiled, and said, "I am ready. I am going home." The woman looked almost frightened, and with some shade of disgust and disappointment. She, as others, might have thought it impossible, as it was unaccountable, that when it came to the point, Callista would hold out.
"She's crazed,"
she said. "I am ready, mother," Callista said, and she got up. "You have been very good to me," she continued. "I have been saying many prayers for you, while my prayers were of no good, for then he was not mine. But now I have espoused him, and am going to be married to-day, and he will hear me." The woman stared at her stupidly, as much as to make it evident that if afterwards a change took place in her as in Callista, that change too, though in so different a soul, must come of something beyond nature. She had something in her hand, and said,
"It's useless to give a mad woman like her the packet which my man has brought me."
Callista took the packet, which was directed to her, and broke the seal. It was from her brother. The little roll of worn parchment opened. A dagger fell out. Some lines were written on the parchment. They were dated Carthage, and ran as follows: "Aristo to his dearest Callista, I write through Cornelius. You have not had it in your power to kill me, but you have taken away half my life. For me, I will cherish the other half, for I love life better than death, but you love annihilation. Yet, if so, die not like a slave, die nobly, mindful of your country. I send you the means." Callista was beyond reflecting on anything around her, except as in a sort of dream. As common men think and speak of heaven, so she now thought and spoke of earth. "I wish him to kill me, not myself," she said. "I am his victim. My brother? I have no brother, except one who is calling me." She was carried to court, and the examination followed. We have already given a specimen of such a process, and here it will be sufficient to make use of two documents, different in kind as far as they go, which have come down to us. The first is an alto relief, which once was coloured, not first rate in art or execution, and of the date of the Emperor Constantius, about a century later. It was lately discovered in the course of excavations made at El Kaf, the modern Sicca, on the ruins of a church or Roman basilica, for the building in question seems to have served each purpose successively. In this sculpture the Praetorium is represented, and the tribunal of the President in it. The tribunal is a high throne, with wings curving round on each side, making the whole construction extend to almost a semicircle, and it is ascended by steps between the wings. The curule chair is at the top of the steps, and in the middle and above it are purple curtains, reaching down to the platform, drawn back on each side, and when drawn close together, running behind the chair, and constituting what was called the secretarium. On one side of the tribunal is a table covered with carpeting, and looking something like a modern ottoman, only higher, and not level at top, and it has upon it the Book of Mandates, the sign of jurisdiction. The sword, too, is represented in the sculpture, to show a criminal case is proceeding. The procurator is seated on the chair; he is in purple, and has a gold chain of triple thread. We can also distinguish his lawyers, whether assessors or consiliarii, also his lictors and soldiers. There, too, are the notaries in a line before him. They are writing down the judge's questions and the prisoner's answers, and one of them is turning round to her, as if to make her speak more loudly. She herself is mounted upon a sort of platform called catasta, like that on which slaves were put up for sale. Two soldiers are by her, who appear to have been dragging her forwards. The executioners are also delineated, naked to the waist, with instruments of torture in their hands. The second document is a fragment of the Acta Proconsularia of her Passion, if indeed it could be trusted to the letter, as containing Callista's answers word for word. It would have a distinctly sacred character, in consequence of our Lord's words, "It shall be given you in that hour what to speak." However, we attach no such special value to this document, since it comes to us through heathen notaries, who may not have been accurate reporters, not to say that, before we did so, we ought to look very carefully into its genuineness. As it is, we believe it to be as true as any part of our narrative, and not truer. It runs as follows: Cneius Messius Decius Augustus II, and Gratus, consuls, on the 7th before the calends of August, in Sicca Veneria, a colony, in the secretary at the tribunal, Martianus procurator sitting, Callista, a maker of images, was brought up by the commentariensis on a charge of Christianity, and when she was placed, Martianus the procurator said, "This folly has been too long. You have made images, and now you will not worship them." Callista answered, "For I have found my true love, whom before I knew not." Martianus the procurator said, "Your true love is, I ween, your last love, for all were true in their time." Callista said, "I worship my true love, who is the only true, and he is the Son of God, and I know none but him." Martianus the procurator said, "You will not worship the gods, but you are willing to love their sons." Callista said,
He is the true Son of the true God, and I am his, and he is mine."
Martianus the procurator said, "Let alone your loves, and swear by the genius of the emperor." Callista said,
"I have but one Lord, the King of kings, the ruler of all."
Martianus the procurator turned to the lictor, and said, "This folly is madness. Take her hand, put incense in it, and hold it over the flame." Callista said,
"You may compel me by your great strength, but my own true Lord and love is stronger."
Martianus the procurator said, "You are bewitched, but we must undo the spell. Take her to the lignum, the prison for criminals." Callista said,
"He has been there before me, and he will come to me there."
Martianus the procurator said, "The jailer will see to that. Let her be brought up to morrow." On the day following, Martianus the procurator, sitting at the tribunal, called up Callista. He said, "Honour our lord, and sacrifice to the gods." Callista said,
"Let me alone. I am content with my one and only Lord."
Martianus the procurator said, "What, did he come to you in prison, as you hoped?" Callista said,
"He came to me amid much pain, and the pain was pleasant, for he came in it."
Martianus the procurator said, "You have got worn and yellow, and he will leave you." Callista said,
"He loves me the more, for I am beautiful when I am black."
Martianus the procurator said, "Throw her into the Tullianum. Perhaps she will find her God there also." Then the procurator entered into the secretary, and drew the veil, and dictated the sentence for the tabella. Then he came out, and the præco read it. "Callista, a senseless and reprobate woman, is hereby sentenced to be thrown into the Tullianum, then to be stretched on the Equuleus, then to be placed on a slow fire, lastly to be beheaded, and left to the dogs and birds." Callista said,
"Thanks to my Lord and King."
Here the acta end, and though they seem to want their conclusion, yet they supply nearly everything which is necessary for our purpose. The one subject on which a comment is needed is the state prison, which, though so little is said of it in the above report, is in fact the real medium, as we may call it, for appreciating its information. A few words will suffice for our purpose. The state prison, then, was arranged on pretty much one and the same plan through the Roman Empire, nay, we may say, throughout the ancient world. It was commonly attached to the government buildings, and consisted of two parts. The first was the vestibule or outward prison, which was a hall, approached from the prætorium, and surrounded by cells opening into it. The prisoners who were confined in these cells had the benefit of the air and light which the hall admitted. Such was the place of confinement allotted to St. Paul at Cæsarea, which is said to be the prætorium of Herod, and hence perhaps it is that in the touching passion of St. Perpetua and St. Felicitas, St. Perpetua tells us that when permitted to have her child, though she was in the inner portion, which will next be described, suddenly the prison seemed to her like the prætorium. From this vestibule there was a passage into the interior prison, called robur or lignum, from the beams of wood which were the instruments of confinement, or from the character of its floor. It had no window or outlet except this door, which, when closed, absolutely shut out light and air. Air, indeed, and coolness might be obtained for it by the barathrum, presently to be spoken of, but of what nature we shall then see. The apartment, called lignum, was the place into which St. Paul and St. Silas were cast at Philippi, before it was known that they were Romans. After scourging them severely, the magistrates, who nevertheless were but the local authorities, and had no proper jurisdiction in criminal cases, put them in prison, bidding the jailer to keep them carefully, who, on receiving such a command, put them in the inner prison, and fastened them in the lignum. And in the Acts of the Scillitane martyrs we read of the proconsul giving sentence, "Let them be thrown into prison, let them be put into the lignum till to morrow." The utter darkness, the heat, and the stench of this miserable place, in which the inmates were confined day and night, is often dwelt upon by the martyrs and their biographers. "After a few days," says St. Perpetua, "we were taken to the prison, and I was frightened, for I never had known such darkness. O bitter day! The heat was excessive by reason of the crowd there." In the Acts of St. Pionius and others of Smyrna, we read that the jailers shut them up in the inner part of the prison, so that, bereaved of all comfort and light, they were forced to sustain extreme torment from the darkness and stench of the prison. And in like manner, other martyrs of Africa, about the time of St. Cyprian's martyrdom, that is, 8 or 10 years later than the date of this story, say, "We were not frightened at the foul darkness of that place, for soon that murky prison was radiant with the brightness of the Spirit. What days, what nights we passed there, no words can describe. The torments of that prison no statement can equal. Yet there was a place of confinement even worse than this. In the floor of this inner prison was a sort of trap door or hole, opening into the barothrum or pit, and called, from the original prison at Rome, the Tullianum. Sometimes prisoners were confined here, sometimes dispatched by being cast headlong into it through the opening. It was into this pit at Rome that St. Chrysanthus was cast, and there, and probably in other cities, it was nothing short of the public cesspool. It may be noticed that the prophet Jeremiah seems to have had personal acquaintance with the vestibule, robur, and barothrum. We read in one place of his being shut up in the atrium, that is, the vestibule, of the prison which was in the house of the king. At another time he is in the ergastulum, which would seem to be the inner prison. Lastly, his enemies let him down by ropes into the lacus or pit, in which there was no water but mud. As to Callista, then, after the first day's examination, she was thrown for nearly 24 hours into the stifling robur, or inner prison. After the sentence, on the second day, she was let down, as the commencement of her punishment, that is, of her martyrdom, into the loathsome barothrum, lacus or pit, called Tullianum, there to lie for another 20 hours before she was brought out to the aeculius or rack. End of chapter 33. Chapter 34 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Martyrdom. Callista had sighed for the bright and clear atmosphere of Greece, and she was thrown into the robur and plunged into the barothrum of Sicca. But in reality, though she called it Greece, she was panting after a better country and a more lasting home, and this country and home she had found. She was now setting out for it. It was indeed no slight marvel that she was not already there. She had been lowered into that pit of death before noon on the day of her second examination, and excepting some unwholesome bread and water, according to the custom of the prison, had had no food since she came into the custody of the commentariensis the day before. The order came from the magistrates to bring her out earlier in the morning than was intended, or the prison might have really effected that death which Calphurnius had proposed to pretend. When the apparitors attempted to raise her, she neither spoke or moved, nor could well be seen. "Black as Orcus," said one of the fellows. "Another torch there. I can't see where she nestles." "There she is, like a bundle of clothes," said another. "Madam gets up late this morning," said a third. "She's used to softer couches," said a fourth. "Ha, ha! 'Tis a spoiler of beauty, this hole," said a fifth. "She is the demon of stubbornness, and must be crushed," said the jailer. "She likes it, or she would not choose it." "The plague take the witch," said another. "We shall have better seasons when a few like her are ferreted out." They got her out like a corpse, and put her on the ground outside the prison. When she still did not move, Two of them took her between them on their shoulders and arms, and began to move forward, the instrument of torture preceding her. The fresh air of the morning revived her. She soon sat up. She seemed to drink in life again and become conscious. "Oh, beautiful, oh, beautiful light!" she whispered. "Oh, lovely light, and my life! Oh, my life! Oh, my light and my life! Receive me." Gradually she became fully alive to all that was going on. She was going to death, and that rather than deny him who had bought her by his own death. He had suffered for her, and she was to suffer for him. He had been racked on the cross. She too was to have her limbs dislocated after his pattern. She scarcely rested on the men's shoulders, and they vowed afterwards that they thought she was going to fly away, vile witch as she was. "The witch! The witch!" the mob screamed out, for she had now come to the place of her conflict. "We'll pay you off for blight and pestilence. Where's our bread? Where's the maize and barley? Where are the grapes?" And they uttered fierce yells of execration, and seemed disposed to break through the line of apparitors and to tear her to pieces. Yet after all it was not a very hearty uproar, but got up for the occasion. The populace had spent their force, not to say their lives, in the riot in which she was apprehended. The priests and priestesses of the temples had sent the poor wretches, and paid them. The place of execution was on the northeast of the city, outside the walls and towards the mountain. It was where slaves were buried, and it was as hideous as such spots usually were. The neighbourhood was wild, open to the beasts of prey, who at night used to descend and feast upon the corpses. As Callista approached to the scene of her suffering, the expression of her countenance had so altered that a friend would scarce have known it. There was a tenderness in it, and a modesty which never had been there in that old time. Her cheek had upon it a blush, as when the rising sun suddenly touches some grey rock or tower. Yet it was white and glistening too, so much that others might have said it was like silver. Her eyes were larger than they had been, and gazed steadfastly, as if at what the multitude did not see. Her lips spoke of sweet peace and deep composure. When at length she came close upon the rabble, who had been screaming and yelling so fiercely, men, women, and boys suddenly held their peace. It was first from curiosity, then from amazement, then from awe. At length a fear smote through them, and a strange pity and reverence. They almost seemed inclined to worship what stirred them so much, they knew not how. A new idea had visited those poor ignorant souls. A few minutes sufficed to put the rack into working order. She was laid down upon its board in her poor bedimmed tunic, which once flashed so bright in the sun, she who had been ever so delicate in her apparel. Her wrists and ankles were seized, extended, fastened to the movable blocks at the extremities of the plank. She spoke her last word: "For thee, my Lord and love, for thee, accept me, O my love, upon this bed of pain, and come to me, O my love, make haste and come." The men turned round the wheels rapidly to and fro. The joints were drawn out of their sockets, and then snapped in again. She had fainted. They waited for her coming to. They still waited. They got impatient. "Dash some water on her," said one. "Spit in her face, and it will do," said a second. "Prick her with your spike," said a third. "Hold your wild talk," said a fourth. "She's gone to the shades." They gathered round and looked at her attentively. They could not bring her back. So it was, she had gone to her Lord and her love. "Lay her out for the wolves and vultures," said the cornicularius, and he was going to appoint guards till nightfall, when up came the stationarii and Calphurnius in high wrath. "You dogs," he cried, "what trick have you been practising against the soldiers of Rome?" However, expostulation and reproach were bootless, nor would it answer here to go into the quarrel which ensued over the dead body. The magistrates, having got scent of Calphurnius's scheme, had outwitted the tribune by assigning an earlier hour than was usual for the execution. Life could not be recalled, nor did the soldiers, of course, dare publicly to disobey the proconsul's order for the exposure of the corpse. All that could be done they did. They took her down with rude reverence from the rack, and placed her on the sand, and then they set guards to keep off the rabble, and to avail themselves of any opportunity which might occur to show consideration towards her. End of chapter 34. Chapter 35 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. The Corpo Santo. The Son of Africa has passed over the heavens, but has not dared with one of his fierce rays to profane the sacred relics which lie out before him. The mists of evening rise up, and the heavy dews fall, but they neither bring the poison of decay to that gracious body, nor receive it thence. The beasts of the wild are roaming and roaring at a distance, or nigh at hand. Not any one of them presumes to touch her. No vultures may promise themselves a morning meal from such a victim, as they watch through the night upon the high crags which overlook her. The stars have come out on high, and they too look down upon Callista, as if they were funeral lights in her honour. Next the moon rises up to see what has been going on, and edges the black hangings of the night with silver. Yet mourning and dirge are but of formal observance, when a brave champion has died for her God. The world of ghosts has as little power over such an one as the world of nature. No evil spirit has aught to say to her, who has gone in her baptismal white before the throne. No penal fire shall be her robe, who has been carried in her bright flammeum to the bridal chamber of the Lamb. A divine odour fills the air, issuing from that senseless, motionless, broken frame. A circle of light gleams around her brow, and even when the daylight comes again, it there is faintly seen. Her features have reassumed their former majesty, but with an expression of childlike innocence and heavenly peace. The thongs have drawn blood at the wrists and ankles, which has run and soaked into the sand. But angels received her body from the soldiers when they took it off the rack, and it lies sweetly and modestly composed upon the ground. Passers-by stand still and gaze; idlers gather round. The report spreads in Sicca that neither sun by day, nor moon by night, nor moist atmosphere, nor beast of prey has power over the wonderful corpse. Nay, that they cannot come near it without falling under some strange influence, which makes them calm and grave, expels bad passions, and allays commotion of mind. Many come again and again for the mysterious and soothing effect she exerts upon them. They cannot talk freely about it to each other, and are seized with a sacred fear when they attempt to do so. Those who have merely heard their report without seeing her, say that these men have been in a grove of the Eumenides, or have suddenly encountered the wolf. The popular sensation continues and extends. Some say it is magical, others that it is from the great gods. Day sinks again into evening, evening becomes night, the night wears out, and morning is coming again. It begins to dawn. A glimmer is faintly spread abroad, and mixing with the dark makes twilight, which gradually brightens, and the outlines of nature rise dimly out of the night. Gradually the sacred body comes to sight, and as the light grows stronger around it, gradually too the forms of 5 men emerge who had not been there the night before. One is in front, the rest behind, with a sort of bier or litter. They stand on the mountain side of her, and must have come from the country. It has been a bold enterprise, theirs, to expose themselves to the nightly beasts, and now again to the rabble and the soldiers. The soldiers are at some little distance, silent and watchful. Such of the rabble as have passed the night there have had some superstitious object in their stay. They have thought to get portions of the flesh for magical purposes, a finger, or a tooth, or some hair, or a portion of her tunic, or the blood-stained rope which was twisted around her wrist and ankle. As the light makes her at length quite visible to the youth on the other side, who stands by himself with clasped hands and tearful eyes, he shrinks from the sight. He turns round to his companions, who are provided with a large winding sheet or pall, and with the help of one of them, to the surprise of the populace, he spreads it all over the body, and having done this, he stands again trembling just for a few seconds, absorbed in his meditations, praying and weeping, and nerving himself for what is to follow. Ah, poor Agellius, you have not risen yet to the pitch of triumph, and other thoughts must be let to range through your breast. Other emotions must spend themselves before you are prepared simply to rejoice, exult, and glory in the lifeless form which lies before you. You are upon a brave work, but your heart is torn while you set hand to it, and you linger before you begin. It was in the pride of her earthly beauty and the full vigour and elevation of her mind that he last had seen her. It seemed an age since that morning, as if a chasm ran between the now and the then, when she so fascinated him with her presence, and so majestically rebuked him for bowing to that fascination. Yet on his memory every incident of that interview was fixed and was indelible. Oh, why should the great Creator shatter one of His most admirable works? If the order of the sun and stars is adorable, if the laws by which earth and sea are kept together mark the hand of supreme wisdom and power, how much nobler perfection of beauty is manifested in man, and of human nature itself. Here was the supereminent crown, a soul full of gifts, full of greatness, full of intellect, placed in an outward form, equally surpassing in its kind, and still more surpassingly excellent from its intimate union and subordination to the soul, so as almost to be its simple expression. Yet this choicest, rarest specimen of almighty skill, the Almighty had pitilessly shattered, in order that it might inherit a higher and eternal perfection. O mystery of mysteries! That heaven should not be possibly obtained without such grinding down and breaking up of our original nature. O mysterious! That principle in us, whatever it is, and however it came there, which is so antagonistic to God, which has so spoilt what seems so good, that all must be undone and must begin anew. An enemy hath done this, and knowing as much as this, and no more, we must leave the awful mystery to that day when all things shall be made light. Agellius had not been idle while these thoughts passed through his mind. He has stooped down and scooped up such portions of the sand as are moistened with her blood, and has committed them to a small bag which he has taken out of his bosom. Then, without delay, looking round to his attendants and signing to them, with two of the party he resolutely crossed over to the other side of the corpse, covering it from attack, while his two assistants who were left proceeded quickly to lay hold of it. They had raised it, laid it on the bier, and were setting off by an unusual track across the waste, while Agellius, Aspar, and the third were grappling with some ruffians who had rushed upon them. Few, however, were there as yet to take part against them, but their cries of alarm were bringing others up, and the Christians were in growing danger of being worsted and carried off, when suddenly the soldiers interfered. Under pretence of keeping the peace, they laid about them with their heavy maces, and so it was. The blows took effect on the heads and shoulders of the rabble, with but slight injury to Agellius and his companions. The latter took instant advantage of the diversion, and vanished out of view by the same misleading track which their comrades had already chosen. If they, or the party who had preceded them, came within the range of sight of any goatherds upon the mountains, we must suppose that angels held those heathen eyes, that they should not recognize them. End of chapter 35. Chapter 36 of Callista by John Henry Newman. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Lux perpetua sanctis tuis Domine. The bier and its bearers and its protectors have reached the cave in safety, and pace down the gallery, preceded by its Christian hosts, with lighted tapers, singing psalms. They place the sacred body before the altar, and the Mass begins. Saint Cyprian celebrates, and after the Gospel he adds a few words of his own. He said that they were engaged in praising, blessing, and exalting the adorable grace of God, which had snatched so marvellously a brand out of the furnace. Benedicamus Patrem et Filium cum Sancto Spiritu, benedictus et laudabilis et gloriosus et super exaltatus in saecula, every day doing marvels and exceeding all that seemed possible in power and love, by new and still newer manifestations. A Greek had come to Africa to embellish the shrines of heathenism, to minister to the usurpation of the evil one, and to strengthen the old ties which connected genius with sin. And she had suddenly found salvation, but yesterday a poor child of earth, and to-day an inhabitant of the heavens, but yesterday without God and without hope, and to-day a martyr with the green palm and golden vestment, worshipping before the throne, but yesterday the slave of Satan, and spending herself on the vanities of time, and to-day drinking of the never-cloying torrents of bliss everlasting, but yesterday one of a number, a grain of a vast heap, destined indiscriminately for the flame. To-day one of the elect souls, written from eternity in the book of life, and predestined to glory, but yesterday hungry and thirsty and restless for some object worthy an immortal spirit, to-day enjoying the ineffable ecstasy of the marriage feast and the espousals of Emmanuel, but yesterday tossed about on a sea of opinion, and to-day entranced in the vision of infallible truth and immutable sanctity. And yet what was she but only one instance out of 10,000 of the almighty and all-manifold grace of the Redeemer? And who was there of all of them there assembled, from the most heroic down to the humblest beginner, from the authoritative preacher down to the slave or peasant, but was equally, though in his own way, a miracle of mercy, and a vessel, once of wrath, if now of glory? Only might he and all who heard him persevere as they had begun, so that if, as was so probable, their trial was to be like hers, its issue might be like hers also. Saint Cyprian ceased, and while the deacon opened the sindon for the offertory, the faithful took up alternately the verses of a hymn, which we here insert in a most unworthy translation. The number of thine own complete, sum up and make an end, sift clean the chaff and house the wheat, and then, O Lord, descend. Descend and solve by that descent this mystery of life, where good and ill together blent wage an undying strife. For rivers twain are gushing still, and pour a mingled flood, good in the very depths of ill, ill in the heart of good. The last are first, the first are last, as angel eyes behold. These from the sheepcote sternly cast, those welcomed to the fold. No Christian home, no pastor's eye, no preacher's vocal zeal, moved thy dear martyr to defy the prison and the wheel. Forth from the heathen ranks she stepped, the forfeit throne to claim of Christian souls who had not kept their birthright and their name. Grace formed her out of sinful dust. She knelt a soul defiled. She rose in all the faith and trust and sweetness of a child. And in the freshness of that love she preached by word and deed the mysteries of the world above, her new-found glorious creed. And running in a little hour of life the course complete, she reached the throne of endless power, and sits at Jesus' feet. Her spirit there, her body here, make one the earth and sky. We use her name, we touch her bier, we know her God is nigh. The last sentiment of the yet unfinished hymn was receiving an answer while they sang it. Juba had been brought into the chapel in the hands of his brother and the exorcists. Since he had been under their care, he had been on the whole calm and manageable, with intervals of wild tempest and mad terror. He spoke at times of an awful incubus weighing on his chest, which he could not throw off, and said he hoped that they would not think all the blasphemies he uttered were his own. On this occasion he struggled most violently, and shook with distress, and as they brought him towards the sacred relics, a thick cold dew stood upon his brow, and his features shrank and collapsed. He held back, and exerted himself with all his might to escape, foaming at the mouth, and from time to time uttering loud shrieks and horrible words, which disturbed, though they could not interrupt, the hymn. His bearers persevered. They brought him close to Callista, and made him touch her feet with his hands. Immediately he screamed fearfully, and was sent up into the air with such force that he seemed discharged from some engine of war. Then he fell back upon the earth, apparently lifeless. The long prayer was ended, the Sursum Corda was uttered, Juba raised himself from the ground. When the words of consecration had been said, he adored with the faithful. After the Mass his attendants came to him. He was quite changed. He was quiet, harmless, and silent. The evil spirit had gone out, but he was an idiot. This wonderful deliverance was but the beginning of the miracles which followed the martyrdom of St. Callista. It may be said to have been the resurrection of the Church at Sicca. In not many months Decius was killed, and the persecution ceased there. Castus was appointed bishop, and numbers began to pour into the fold. The lapsed asked for peace, or at least such blessings as they could have. Heathens sought to be received. When asked for their reason, they could only say that Callista's history and death had affected them with constraining force, and that they could not help following her steps. Increasing in boldness as well as numbers, the Christians cowed both magistrates and mob. The spirit of the populace had been already broken, and the continual change of masters and measures with them in the imperial government inflicted a chronic timidity on the magistracy. A handsome church was soon built, to which Callista's body was brought, and which remained till the time of the Diocletian persecution. Juba attached himself to this church, and though he could not be taught even to sweep the sacred pavement, still he never was troublesome or mischievous. He continued in this state for about 10 years. At the end of that time, one morning after Mass, which he always attended in the church porch, he suddenly went to the bishop and asked for baptism. He said that Callista had appeared to him, and had restored to him his mind. On conversing with him, the holy Castus found that his recovery was beyond all doubt, and not knowing how long his lucid state would last, he had no hesitation, with such instruction as the time admitted, in administering the sacred rite as Juba wished. After receiving it, he proceeded to the tomb within which lay St. Callista, and remained on his knees before his benefactress till nightfall. Not even then was he disposed to rise, and so he was left there for the night. Next morning he was found still in the attitude of prayer, but lifeless. He had been taken away in his baptismal robe. As to Agellius, if he be the bishop of that name who suffered at Sicca in his old age in the persecution of Diocletian, we are possessed in this circumstance of a most interesting fact to terminate his history withal. What makes this more likely is, that this bishop is recorded to have removed the body of St. Callista from its original position, and placed it under the high altar, at which he said Mass daily. After his own martyrdom, St. Agellius was placed under the high altar also. End of chapter 36. End of Callista by John Henry Newman. Recording by Carol Pelster.